The Nevada night is a blanket of quiet, a deep and profound silence that seems to swallow sound whole. Out here, far from the glow of cities, the sky isn't just above you. It surrounds you, a vast dome of black velvet pierced by countless diamond points of starlight. The air is cool and clean, carrying the faint, earthy scent of sagebrush and dry soil. In the distance, the silhouettes of mountains stand like ancient, sleeping giants against a horizon that feels infinitely far away. This is a landscape built for secrets, for holding onto whispers and hiding them in the hollows between the hills. And in the heart of this immense, silent desert lies a place that has become the modern world's greatest vault, a stretch of land and sky known simply as Area 51. For decades, that name has sparked the imagination. It has fueled countless stories, inspired blockbuster films, and drawn the curious to the edges of its restricted boundaries. To some, it is merely a remote military testing facility, a place where cutting-edge aircraft are borne away from prying eyes. The official explanations are tidy, logical. They speak of stealth technology and reconnaissance platforms. But the legend, the persistent, humming rumor that has seeped into our culture, tells a different tale. It speaks of a place where the line between human invention and something truly otherworldly became irrevocably blurred. Area 51 isn't just a base. It's a symbol. It represents the ultimate what if, the tantalizing possibility that we are not alone, and that someone, somewhere, decided the truth was too volatile for public consumption. Tonight, as we settle into this quiet space, we're not chasing wild conspiracy theories. We're not piecing together blurry photographs or deciphering chaotic government documents. Instead, we're going to explore a story that exists at the very core of the Area 51 enigma. It's a story whispered about in certain circles, referenced in fragments by those who claim to have been there. It's known by a deceptively simple name, the Sport Model. This isn't a tale of a crash saucer from Roswell, though that story may have paved the way. This is the story of what came next. This is the secret they never wanted you to know, not a singular event, but an ongoing project, a captured marvel of engineering that redefined what was thought to be possible. Imagine, for a moment, walking through a hangar that doesn't officially exist. The air is cool and still. Under the sterile glow of overhead lights sits an object that seems to defy the very principles it was built upon. Its lines are smooth, graceful, almost organic. There are no visible seams, no rivets, no wings or tail in any conventional sense. It looks less like a machine that was manufactured and more like a seed pod that was grown, a perfectly formed artifact from a future we can scarcely comprehend. This is the heart of the mystery. This object, the Sport Model, represents a leap in technology so profound that its very existence had to be buried beneath layers of classification, misinformation, and fear. So, we begin here, under this expansive desert sky. We acknowledge the official stories, the plausible deniability, the mountains of speculation. But we let our curiosity gently guide us past all that, toward a singular, compelling question that has lingered in the shadows for generations. What if the most incredible secret wasn't about finding something from out there, but about learning to understand it, to replicate it, right here in the desert? And what if everything you've ever heard about Area 51, all the wild tales and dismissed sightings, were merely the surface ripples of a truth that runs far, far deeper? To understand the gravity of a secret, you must first understand the vault that holds it. The story of Area 51 doesn't begin with flying saucers or little green men. It begins, quite mundanely, with a map. In the mid-1950s, as the Cold War cast its long, tense shadow, the U.S. government needed a remote, secure location to test a revolutionary new aircraft, the U-2 spy plane. Surveyors scanned the vast Nevada test site, their eyes settling on a dusty, salt-flat adjacent area near Groom Lake. It was perfect, isolated, enclosed by mountain ranges, and already under federal control due to nuclear testing nearby. With a presidential order, the patch of desert known by its grid designation, Area 51, was born. Its purpose was clear: to develop tools for seeing the unseen, for gathering intelligence from the edge of space, in utter secrecy. This foundational need for invisibility baked secrecy into the base's very DNA. The workers, mostly from the defense contractor Lockheed's secretive Skunk Works division, were flown in on unmarked planes from a terminal in Burbank, California. They signed agreements that promised a lifetime of silence, with penalties that were always implied but rarely stated. Life on the base was a strange paradox, a cutting-edge, high-tech mission conducted in a stark, makeshift world of trailers and Quonset huts, all under a sun that felt relentlessly bright. The people there knew they were working on something that could change the world, but they were islands of knowledge, each person aware only of their own small piece of the puzzle. This culture of compartmentalization wasn't just policy. It became the atmosphere everyone breathed. Yet, you cannot hide everything in the desert. The very aircraft they were testing, the U-2, flew at altitudes unheard of for commercial planes at the time. As commercial jetliners began cruising higher in the late 1950s, airline pilots started reporting something strange. High above, glinting in the setting sun, they would see a mysterious, silvery object. To them, it appeared motionless or moving at impossible speeds. These were the first modern UFO reports linked to the area, though neither the pilots nor the public knew it. The government, aware of the cause, initiated a quiet study. They concluded that these sightings were of their own secret plane, but to admit that would be to reveal the U-2's existence and its extraordinary ceiling. So, a choice was made: let the UFO narrative grow. It was, in a cynical but practical sense, the perfect cover story. The seed of the legend was officially, if accidentally, planted. But a cover story can take on a life of its own. As decades passed, and new, even more exotic aircraft like the State Route 71 Blackbird and the F-117 Nighthawk were developed at Groom Lake, the strange sightings continued. Locals in tiny towns like Rachel, Nevada, would sit on their porches at night and watch the sky. They'd speak of lights that performed maneuvers no plane should be capable of: sudden 90-degree turns, instant acceleration to blinding speeds, a silence that was more unsettling than any roar. These weren't pilots misidentifying known technology anymore. These were ground-level observations of something that behaved unlike any law of physics they understood. The government's silence was absolute. No confirmation, no denial. Just a perimeter of ominous signs warning of deadly force, and white Janet buses ferrying silent workers down the extraterrestrial highway. This official void became a canvas for the public imagination. Into it poured every fear, hope, and suspicion of the 20th century. The Roswell crash of 1947, initially a forgotten news item, was resurrected and intricately woven into Area 51's growing mythology. Was the wreckage, and the beings who piloted it, taken to Groom Lake? Whistleblowers emerged from the shadows, men like Bob Lazar, who claimed to have worked on reverse engineering alien craft in a secret section called S4. His descriptions of gravity generators and Element 115 were dismissed by officials, but ignited the public's belief that the base was a galactic garage. Every denied Freedom of Information Act request, every blurred-out satellite image, every stern warning from a security contractor added another brick to the wall of legend. Area 51 transformed from a secret base into a cultural icon, a modern-day Atlantis where we projected our deepest questions about technology, the cosmos, and power. So, the legend grew in layers. The first was reality, a real, secret base for revolutionary spy planes. The second was convenience, the use of UFO reports as a smokescreen. The third was phenomenon, genuine, unexplained sightings by credible witnesses. The fourth was mythology, the public's fusion of all these elements into a grand narrative of cosmic conspiracy. This complex legacy is crucial. It's the noisy, confusing background static against which a quieter, more specific story struggled to be heard. For among all these stories, the test flights, the mistaken identities, the wild claims, and the government obfuscation, a particular thread persisted. It was less about a crash and more about a prize. Not just debris, but something intact, functional, and breathtakingly advanced. A trophy of unknown origin, sitting in a hangar, waiting to be understood. Among all the legends of Area 51, one stands above the rest, not for its noise, but for its profound, whispered significance. For years, the legend of Area 51 was a story without a definitive narrator. It was a collage of blurry photographs, second-hand accounts, and government silence. The public fascination was a roaring fire, but it was fed by scraps and kindling. Then, in November of 1989, a man walked out of the shadows and into the glare of a television camera, carrying what seemed like a whole log to throw onto the flames. His name was Robert Scott Lazar, and his appearance didn't just add to the mystery, it redefined it, providing a startlingly specific blueprint for the secrets hidden at Groom Lake. Before that moment, Bob Lazar was, by all appearances, a brilliant but unassuming physicist with a fascination for jet engines and high-speed vehicles. He ran a small photo lab in Las Vegas and had a background in electronics. To his neighbors, he was just another guy with an interest in science. But according to his own account, his life took a radical detour when he was recruited for a project of unimaginable scope. He claimed his academic records from Caltech and MIT were subsequently erased, a detail that would become a central point of controversy. Whether seen as a credentialed insider or a fabricated character, the man who stepped forward was calm, soft-spoken, and possessed of a technical demeanor that made his outrageous claims sound strangely matter-of-fact. The circumstances of his revelation were as dramatic as the story itself. Frustrated by what he witnessed and fearing a government cover-up of technology that could benefit humanity, Lazar contacted investigative journalist George Knapp of Las Vegas television station KLAS. He didn't go to a tabloid. He went to a respected newsman. To verify his story, he did something astonishing. He took Knapp and the film crew to a remote vantage point on a secluded highway one evening. There, as if on cue, a strange, disc-shaped object performed a silent, slow glide over the distant Groom Lake range. It was a demonstration, he said, of the very technology he worked on. The resulting broadcast, UFOs, the best evidence, sent shockwaves far beyond the Nevada desert. The initial public reaction was a polarized split, a pattern that defines the UFO topic to this day. Believers saw in Lazar the ultimate insider, the missing piece they had been waiting for, a man with scientific training who could explain the how behind the phenomenon. Skeptics immediately attacked his credibility, pointing to the missing university records and his employment at a local brothel as signs of a fabulist. The government, true to form, issued no meaningful comment. The UFO community itself fractured. Some embraced him as a hero, while others dismissed him as a dangerous distraction. Yet, through the noise, one thing was clear. Lazar had introduced a new lexicon of specifics. Sector 4, Element 115, gravity amplifiers, that shifted the conversation from vague lights in the sky to the mechanics of interstellar travel. The risks Lazar took were monumental and deeply personal. Speaking out meant violating the severe secrecy oaths he claimed to have signed. He described being followed by unmarked cars, having his home burglarized in a way that suggested professional intimidation, and facing character assassination in the press. His previous marriage suffered under the strain. He was essentially erasing his old life to step into a maelstrom of ridicule and threat. His motivation, as he consistently stated, was not fame, which he largely shunned, but a profound sense of duty. He believed the energy source behind the craft he worked on, if understood, could solve the world's energy crises and propel science forward. The secret, in his view, was too important to belong to any one nation. In those early interviews, his demeanor became a key piece of the puzzle for viewers. He was not a charismatic showman. He was often hesitant, careful with his words, and displayed a palpable anxiety that seemed to stem less from the cameras and more from the weight of his story. He spoke in the dry, precise language of an engineer, sketching diagrams of reactor cores and fuel systems. When asked about the beings behind the technology, he offered no sensational tales, only a brief, sobering description of biological entities and a bureaucratic document he called the Yellow Book. His lack of embellishment, his almost frustrating refusal to speculate beyond what he claimed to have seen, lent his testimony an eerie credibility. It felt less like a performance and more like a difficult, draining confession. So, the world was presented with a choice. Believe the story of a man with spotty official records who described working on alien spacecraft, or dismiss him as one of the most elaborate hoaxers in history. The debate raged, and still rages, around his person. But Lazar himself always insisted the focus should not be on him, but on the information. He challenged investigators to look past him, to scrutinize the physics he described and the location he named. He provided a map, not just to a place, but to a concept. And as the dust of that initial media storm began to settle, a single, stunning artifact from his testimony remained, gleaming in the minds of those who listened. What he described would sound impossible, a fantasy ripped from the pages of a sci-fi novel, if not for the intricate, internal logic of the details he provided. Details about an object's propulsion, its material, its seamless construction, details that, according to many, a man in his position simply couldn't have known. Imagine holding a secret so vast it hums inside your skull, a truth that rewires your understanding of reality itself. For Bob Lazar, that secret was no longer an abstract concept. It was a daily routine. He claimed to have driven past the ominous signs of the Nevada test site, boarded a nondescript aircraft, and been flown to a facility where his old life, his identity as a mere physicist, felt like a faint dream. The weight of it was a constant pressure. He walked through unmarked hangars, saw things that defied the textbooks he'd studied, and then returned home to a world shopping for groceries and worrying about mortgages. This psychological dissonance, the chasm between the ordinary and the extraordinary, became his private prison. The moment everything changed wasn't a single event on a calendar, but the slow, unbearable accumulation of silence in that prison. The catalyst, he described, was a growing moral and scientific outrage. It wasn't just fear of being followed or the paranoia of a tapped phone. It was the concrete realization that the technology he was peripherally helping to understand, a propulsion system that manipulated the very fabric of gravity, was being buried, not developed. Its potential to revolutionize energy, transportation, and our place in the cosmos was being locked away in the name of national security and technological monopoly. The secret wasn't just about UFOs. It was about holding back human evolution. This conviction transformed his fear into a slow-burning fuel. The internal conflict was a nightly debate. Stay safe and complicit in what he saw as a crime against humanity, or speak out and risk everything. His safety, his reputation, his freedom. The decision to break his oath of secrecy wasn't made in a television studio or a lawyer's office. It was made in the quiet, darkened space of his own home, likely staring at the mundane artifacts of a life he knew would be shattered. He later described the feeling as a point of no return, like stepping off a cliff edge in slow motion. The fear was palpable, a cold certainty of the storm to come. But it was finally outweighed by a deeper, more compelling force, the need to plant a seed of truth, no matter how small, into the public consciousness. He wasn't expecting to be believed, not fully. He was hoping to create a reference point, a verifiable claim against which future revelations could be measured. To tell the story, he needed a witness he could trust, someone who would listen first to the evidence and not the ridicule. That person was George Knapp. The scene of their first, fateful meeting was devoid of drama, which made the words spoken there all the more powerful. It was not in a shadowy parking garage, but in the ordinary setting of Lazar's life. He presented himself not as a prophet, but as a troubled technician. Knapp, a seasoned journalist with a skeptic's eye, listened as Lazar laid out his credentials, his recruitment, and his incredible workplace. A site called S4, nestled in the mountains south of the main Area 51 base, housing 9 hangar bays built into a hillside. The journalist's role shifted from interviewer to investigator in real time, tasked with verifying the unverifiable. The public unveiling was carefully staged, yet utterly surreal. The now legendary night on Highway 375, known as the Extraterrestrial Highway, was Lazar's audacious proof of concept. He gathered Knapp and the camera crew under the vast desert sky, a silent audience to a performance only he could schedule. He told them where and when to look. And then, as if summoned by the sheer force of his claim, a light appeared. Not a shooting star, not a satellite, but a distinct, structured craft that moved with a silent, controlled grace, executing maneuvers that seemed to mock the laws of inertia. For the crew, it was a moment of profound dislocation. The camera rolled, capturing not just the light, but the stunned silence of the observers. This was no longer just a story. It was a shared experience, an anomaly on film, tied irrevocably to the soft-spoken man pointing at the sky. That televised report was the detonation. Lazar's life, as he knew it, was instantly vaporized in the public blast. He became the most famous whistleblower in the world and the most controversial. The government's silence was a wall. Former colleagues, if they existed, never stepped forward to corroborate. His academic past became a foggy battlefield. Yet, through the chaos of that first media explosion, through the accusations and the fervent defenses, the core of his testimony remained solid, a detailed and strangely consistent artifact. He didn't just speak of aliens in broad strokes. He described the workplace culture, the security procedures, the interior lighting of the hangars, the texture of the craft. And he gave it a name. When asked to describe the specific vehicle he was tasked with studying, the one that was operational, smaller, and more refined than the other disc in the adjacent hangar, he used a term that sounded almost casual, borrowed from the language of automobiles. He called it the sport model. This wasn't a title from a classified document, but a nickname, the kind of shorthand technicians use to differentiate one project from another. In that simple, two-word phrase, the unimaginable was suddenly given form. It was no longer just an alien spacecraft. It was a specific class of vehicle with implied characteristics, sleek, functional, nimble. It suggested a fleet, a variety, a technology that had been cataloged and categorized by human hands. At the center of his earth-shattering testimony, beneath the talk of reactors and Element 115, was this tangible, almost intimate detail, an object so advanced it defied physics, yet was discussed in the break room with a mundane, workaday nickname. And with that name, the sport model ceased to be just a part of Bob Lazar's story and began its journey into the heart of a modern myth. Bob Lazar's journey into the S4 facility was a procession through layers of silence. He described passing through security checkpoints where words were scarce, riding in a windowless bus that muffled the outside world, and walking down corridors with a clinical, oppressive stillness. The purpose of his work was explained in fragments, a need-to-know puzzle he was meant to help solve. But no briefing, no classified document, could have prepared him for the moment he was finally led into one of the 9 hangar bays carved into the Papoose mountain range. The door slid open not with a dramatic hiss, but with a heavy, mechanical inevitability. And there, under the stark, fluorescent light, his reality quietly split in two. The first impression was one of profound, silent presence. The object resting on the polished concrete floor didn't look built, it looked placed. It was a disk, yes, but that word feels crude, reminiscent of toy flying saucers or cheap movie props. This was different. Its metallic surface wasn't simply silver. It was a muted, brushed finish that seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it, giving it a soft, almost ceramic sheen. The color was a cool, neutral tone, like liquid mercury solidified under a twilight sky. There were no sharp edges, no protruding antennae, no landing gear in any conventional sense. Every line, from the gentle curve of its upper dome to the slightly flatter underside, flowed into the next with a seamless, organic grace. It possessed the quiet, self-contained beauty of a perfectly smooth stone found on a remote beach, a beauty that spoke of natural forces and immense age. In terms of size, it was surprisingly intimate. Lazar estimated its diameter at roughly 45 feet, with a height of about 12 feet at the central dome. It wasn't a city block-sized mothership. It was a compact, efficient vehicle, perhaps a scout craft or a personnel transport. Its proportions contributed to its otherworldly elegance. The ratio of its height to its width gave it a low, poised profile, like a predator cat crouched and ready to spring. It didn't sit on struts or a landing pad, but seemed to rest directly on the floor, adding to the unsettling impression that it was merely pausing, not parked. The space around it hummed with a quiet tension, as if the air itself was aware of the anomaly in its midst. To stand before it was to experience a deep cognitive rift. Every instinct, every piece of accumulated knowledge about aerospace engineering, whispered that this object should not exist. There were no visible seams, rivets, weld marks, or panel lines, none of the telltale signs of human manufacturing. Its surface was impossibly smooth, a continuous skin of metal. The craft exuded a sense of unified wholeness, as if it had been cast or grown in a single, perfect piece. It didn't appear assembled, it appeared manifested. This provoked a specific, haunting feeling that Lazar and others have struggled to articulate, a feeling not of fear, but of profound dislocation. It was the sensation of seeing something that clearly belonged to a different set of rules, a different timeline of technological evolution. It was an artifact from a future that hadn't happened here, or from elsewhere that had solved problems we were still struggling to name. That first glimpse was a theft of certainty. It replaced solid ground with a question mark. The sheer physicality of the sport model, its silent, undeniable there-ness, made abstract concepts of alien life suddenly, jarringly concrete. The mind could try to dismiss a light in the sky as a weather balloon or a trick of the atmosphere. But this was an object. You could have walked around it. You could have, hypothetically, reached out and touched its cool, enigmatic skin. Its presence in that government hangar was a statement more powerful than any whistleblower's interview. Someone, somewhere, believed this was real enough to lock away and study. The visual mystery was complete, a perfect enigma sitting in a pool of artificial light. But its appearance, its awe-inspiring and silent form, was just the beginning of the mystery. For the true revolution wasn't in how it looked, but in how it was said to move, and more importantly, what made that movement possible. Upon closer inspection, the sport model's design began to reveal a logic that was profoundly alien, yet eerily intuitive. The most immediate and baffling characteristic was its utter lack of joints. Human engineering is a symphony of connection points, welds, bolts, screws, and seals, each a potential point of failure, each telling the story of assembly. This craft told no such story. Its hull was a single, unbroken surface, as if the very molecules of the material had been persuaded to flow together and harden into this specific, flawless form. running a hand over it. One would have felt no transition, no ridge, only a perfect, cool continuity. This suggested a manufacturing technology that could manipulate matter at a fundamental level, perhaps through a process akin to atomic deposition or a form of magnetic molding far beyond our additive or subtractive techniques. It was a shell with no obvious door, no windows, no vents, a perfect, enigmatic egg. The material itself, according to Lazar's testimony, was something extraordinary. He described it as a stable, metallic element with an incredibly high atomic number, far beyond what was on our periodic table at the time. This wasn't stainless steel or titanium. It had a distinctive weight and density, yet the craft itself was surprisingly light for its size when moved, a paradox that hinted at properties we don't yet comprehend. The surface had a slight give to it, a resilience unlike the hard brittleness of most metals, more like a very dense ceramic polymer. It was utterly non-corrosive and showed no signs of wear or oxidation, not even microscopic scratching from atmospheric particles at tremendous speed. It was, in essence, a material engineered for eternity and the rigors of interstellar travel. Access to the interior was granted, Lazar claimed, through a hidden doorway that became apparent only when activated by a specific, unknown method, perhaps a resonant frequency or a proximity signal. Once inside, the environment shifted dramatically. The interior was not a maze of cramped machinery, but a surprisingly open, functional space dominated by curved, flowing architecture. The walls, floor, and ceiling blended into one another in soft, rounded contours, eliminating harsh corners. The lighting was indirect, emanating from the surfaces themselves in a soft, ambient glow that cast no shadows. The color palette was muted, dominated by soft grays and muted earth tones, creating a calm, neutral, and oddly serene atmosphere. It felt less like a cockpit and more like the interior of a sophisticated, organic pod. Dominating the central space were 3 seats, and their design was one of the most quietly unsettling details. They were not sized for an adult human. They were compact, with low backs and contoured shapes that suggested an occupant with a smaller stature and a different skeletal structure, perhaps a being around 4 to 4.5 feet tall. There were no harnesses, no seatbelts. This implied an inertial dampening system so effective that violent maneuvers would not throw the occupants around the cabin. The seats were arranged in a slight triangular pattern, facing a central control area, suggesting a collaborative operation rather than a single pilot command structure. The control panels themselves were the ultimate departure from terrestrial design. Lazar described them as featuring no switches, levers, or traditional dials. Instead, there were smooth, dark panels that would illuminate with strange, geometric symbols when activated, a tactile interface that likely responded to touch or thought. The symbols were unlike any written language on Earth, composed of sharp angles and interconnected lines that seemed to represent functional concepts or system statuses rather than an alphabet. Most strikingly, he reported a complete absence of screens or viewports. Navigation, it seemed, did not rely on looking out, but on sensing through the hull itself, likely via a gravitational or spatial mapping system that projected data directly into the pilot's awareness or onto a field within the cabin. Every proportion inside felt off by human standards. The ceiling was lower, the corridors narrower, the control surfaces placed at a height that would be uncomfortable for a tall person to reach. This was an environment built by and for a different form of intelligence with different physical needs. The overall impression was one of sublime efficiency and minimalist purpose. There was nothing decorative, nothing superfluous. Every curve, every surface, every implied function served the singular goal of harnessing and directing an immense power for travel. There were no loose wires, no access panels for maintenance as we know it. It was a sealed, self-contained system, implying either a reliability that never required servicing or a maintenance technology as alien as the craft itself. The design, in its every nuanced detail, did not suggest a mere 100-year jump ahead of our own stealth fighters. It suggested an intelligence operating on principles and with a mastery of physics that lay beyond our current comprehension, turning a nuts-and-bolts description into a blueprint for awe. At the heart of the sport model's mystery, buried within its seamless hull, lay its most profound secret, the source of its power. According to Bob Lazar, this wasn't a conventional engine burning fuel or a nuclear reactor splitting atoms. The craft was powered by an element that, in the late 1980s, was pure science fiction, a blank space on the periodic table waiting to be discovered. He called it Element 115. At the time of his revelations, the highest officially confirmed atomic number was 109. Element 115 was not just unknown. It was considered by mainstream physics to be likely impossible to synthesize in any stable, usable form. Lazar's claim wasn't merely about advanced engineering. It was a declaration that someone, human or otherwise, had access to a realm of material science we hadn't yet reached. Lazar described Element 115, or Moscovium as it would later be officially named, not as a radioactive hazard, but as a stable, metalloid substance. He claimed the sport model utilized it in the form of small, triangular wafers or ingots, about the size of a coin, but significantly heavier due to its incredible density. The most critical property of this substance, he asserted, was its role in gravity generation. In his explanation, Element 115 possessed a unique nuclear structure, a specific number of protons and neutrons in its nucleus, that produced its own gravitational field. This wasn't the passive gravity of mass described by Einstein, but an active, amplified gravitational effect that could be channeled and directed. In essence, the element wasn't just fuel. It was the key to manipulating the fabric of space-time itself. The proposed system was elegantly brutal in its concept. Lazar described a reactor where a small piece of element 115 was bombarded with protons in a particle accelerator. This collision, he claimed, would cause the 115 nucleus to produce a minute amount of a different, exotic element, element 116, in a process that released antimatter. This antimatter would then be channeled to annihilate with a common matter target, creating an immense burst of energy. But here was the revolutionary twist. This energy release was not primarily about heat or thrust. It was tuned, through the unique properties of the 115 fuel, to amplify and project a controlled gravitational wave. This was the core of the gravity amplification system. The power generated was used to excite 3 football-sized devices called gravity amplifiers mounted under the craft, which would then project a focused gravitational field, effectively bending space-time around the vehicle. To the scientific establishment of 1989, this sounded like fantasy. The idea of a stable, high atomic number element was debated. The notion of using an element to directly generate a controllable gravitational field was heresy, squarely in the realm of speculative physics. Mainstream science held that manipulating gravity required the mass of a planet or star, or energies so vast they were unimaginable. Lazar was describing a desktop reactor doing what we thought only cosmic-scale phenomena could achieve. His story was dismissed by many as the misinformed ramblings of a fraud who had cobbled together concepts from fringe science papers. The sheer audacity of the claim became a primary reason to dismiss his entire testimony. Then, history performed a strange and slow-motion validation. In 2003, over a decade after Lazar first spoke the number 115 on television, a team of Russian and American scientists at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in Dubna, Russia, succeeded in synthesizing a few fleeting atoms of element 115. They did it by bombarding americium-243 with calcium-48 ions. The resulting atoms existed for only a fraction of a second before decaying. In 2015, the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry officially recognized the discovery and named it moscovium. The scientific community rightly pointed out that this synthesized version was unstable and bore no resemblance to the stable, usable material Lazar described. Yet, an undeniable fact remained. The element itself, once a fictional placeholder, was now real. The number was no longer a fantasy. For those following the story, it was a chilling coincidence that begged the question: did Lazar get lucky with a wild guess? Or was he referencing a stable isotope of 115 that our best labs cannot yet create? Lazar added a sensory detail that cemented the image in the mind's eye: the reactor's glow. He described a distinct, orange-pink light emanating from the propulsion system when activated. Not the white-hot glare of a jet engine or the bluish shimmer of a nuclear reactor, but a softer, warmer, almost organic luminescence. This glow, he said, was a byproduct of the high-energy reactions taking place within the core. It painted a picture of otherworldly machinery at work, not roaring and shuddering, but humming and glowing, a piece of a star's heart captured and tamed inside a polished metallic disc. This detail transformed the theoretical into the visual, making the impossible power source feel strangely tangible. This wasn't just advanced technology, a mere iteration on what we already knew. It was an application of physics operating on principles we had not yet uncovered. Using a material from an island of stability on the periodic table we can barely imagine. The sport model, if the story holds, wasn't flying. It was falling, with exquisite control, in a direction of its own choosing. The true genius, or the profound alienness, of the sport model was not in its power source, but in how that power was applied. It didn't push against anything. According to Lazar's account, it did something far more elegant and bewildering. It rearranged the relationship between itself and the universe. Conventional propulsion, from a propeller to a rocket engine, works on the principle of action and reaction. You throw mass backwards to move forwards, fighting against gravity and atmospheric drag. The sport model allegedly sidestepped this entire struggle. Its 3 gravity amplifiers, positioned underneath the hull, were not engines in any traditional sense. They were projectors, devices designed to create a localized, intense gravitational field that could be precisely shaped and aimed. Imagine gravity not as a force that pulls you down, but as a property of space itself, like the slope of a hill. What these amplifiers supposedly did was create a new, steep hill of gravity directly in front of the craft. The vehicle, sitting in the weaker gravitational field of the Earth, would then naturally slide downhill toward this artificially created point of high gravity. But here's the crucial twist. The craft doesn't physically fall through space. Instead, the intense, projected gravitational field warps space-time, effectively pulling the destination toward the craft and pushing the space behind it away. The craft remains stationary within a self-generated bubble of space-time, while the coordinate system of the universe itself shifts around it. To an outside observer, it would look like the disk instantaneously accelerated or changed direction. Inside, the occupants would feel no inertia, no g-forces, because they are not moving relative to their local space-time frame. The frame itself is moving. Lazar described the 3 amplifiers working in concert, like the vertices of a triangle, to tilt and steer this gravitational hill. By varying the intensity and vector of the field produced by each one, the craft could be oriented in any direction, could hover motionless, or could accelerate to phenomenal speeds almost instantly. This explained the infamous observables of UFOs: sudden 90-degree turns, instantaneous acceleration, and silent operation. There was no air being displaced for sound, no fiery exhaust for thrust. The craft was simply redefining down for itself, over and over, thousands of times per second, and falling effortlessly toward that new down. It wasn't flying. It was controlling the shape of the local gravitational landscape and surfing the contours it created. This concept posed an immense challenge to Lazar's own understanding of physics. He was trained in conventional systems. He spoke of trying to wrap his mind around the principles at play, of studying limited documentation that read more like philosophy or advanced topology than engineering manuals. The system had no moving parts, produced no measurable heat or radiation signature in its stable state, and seemed to operate on a logic where cause and effect, as we know them, were blended. His attempts to understand were, by his own admission, fragmentary. He was a technician asked to diagnose a circuit in a device that didn't use electricity as we define it. The implications of what he was seeing, a working gravity control system, dwarfed the technical details he could glean. Those implications for space travel are universe-altering. If you can generate and control a strong gravitational field, you solve almost every major problem of interstellar travel. You negate the crushing g-forces of acceleration, allowing for gentle travel at velocities that could approach the speed of light. You create your own artificial gravity inside the craft for long-duration journeys. Most profoundly, if you can warp space-time sufficiently, you might bypass the speed of light limit entirely by contracting space in front of you and expanding it behind you, a concept known in theoretical physics as an Alcubierre warp drive. The sport models describe technology seem to be a practical, working example of these very theories, a physics package that turned cosmology into a commute. Distances between stars would cease to be barriers measured in light years and become simply destinations, their travel time determined by the strength of your gravity generators. This propulsion mystery stands as the ultimate pillar of the story. It is the point where the tale either collapses under the weight of its own impossibility or ascends into a new paradigm. It forces a profound question. If what Lazar described is a fiction, it is a fiction built on a deep and intuitive understanding of cutting-edge theoretical physics concepts that were only beginning to be formally discussed in the late 80s and early 90s. If it is true, then it means the fundamental forces that bind our universe are not immutable laws to be obeyed, but instruments to be played. The silent, glowing disk in the desert hangar would then represent not just an aircraft, but a new chapter in the story of reality itself. It would mean that everything we think we know about motion, about energy, about the very structure of the cosmos, is merely the first page of a much longer book. If true, this changed everything we knew about the universe, not by adding a new fact, but by revealing that the rules themselves were far more flexible and far more beautiful than we had ever dared to dream. The main Area 51 facility at Groom Lake is a secret, but it's a secret with a silhouette against the sky, a place you can almost point to on a map. The site Lazar called S for existed in a deeper stratum of classification. It was a secret within a secret, a hidden annex to the already hidden. Its purported location was to the south, nestled in a remote box canyon near the dry basin of Papoose Lake, within the rugged embrace of the Papoose Mountains. This area is even more desolate, more geographically isolated than Groom Lake itself, a landscape of jagged rock and silent valleys that seemed designed by nature to keep its own counsel. The journey there was the first ritual of erasure, a process designed to strip away a person's sense of place and time before they even arrived. Lazar described the commute not as a simple drive, but as a disorienting protocol. He would report first to a nondescript terminal in Las Vegas, far from the main airport. From there, he and other personnel would board one of the unmarked, windowless aircraft commonly called Janet flights. But this leg only took them to the main Groom Lake facility. The final, most clandestine segment of the journey was conducted on the ground, in a bus that was a rolling sensory deprivation chamber. The windows were completely blacked out, not just tinted, but sealed with opaque material. The interior lights were dim. There were no conversations. The atmosphere was one of shared, quiet compliance. The vehicle didn't take a direct route. Lazar recalled feeling it make numerous turns, navigating what felt like a long, circuitous path. This was likely a deliberate security measure, designed to prevent anyone from tracking the distance, direction, or specific turns to deduce S4's true coordinates. You were meant to feel transported, not to navigate. The only sounds were the hum of the engine, the crunch of gravel under tires, and the occasional lurch as the bus navigated the rough, unpaved roads of the test site. The effect was profound. By the time the bus finally rolled to a stop, any internal compass was utterly scrambled. You knew you were somewhere in the Nevada desert, but the where had been carefully, methodically stolen from you. When the doors finally hissed open, the first impression was not of a bustling military base, but of eerie, geometric order imposed upon raw wilderness. The facility was built directly into the steep slope of a mountain. Instead of traditional buildings, what he saw were 9 large, identical hangar doors, painted to match the gray-brown of the surrounding rock, their edges perfectly flush with the mountainside. They looked less like entrances and more like giant, sealed vaults. There were no towers, no fences in the immediate vicinity. The security was the remoteness itself, and likely hidden sensors and patrols in the surrounding hills. The air was still and dry, carrying a profound silence broken only by the distant cry of a desert bird. The overall feeling was not of a workplace, but of a tomb for mysteries, a place where incredible things were kept in cold storage, away from the sun and from prying eyes. It was a location that felt simultaneously high-tech and ancient, a bunker for the future buried in the past. Stepping out onto that dusty apron, a person would have felt a complete severance from the world they knew. They had arrived at the inner sanctum, and what waited inside those silent, mountain-set doors would challenge everything they thought they knew about technology, history, and humanity's place in the cosmos. Passing through one of those massive, mountain-set doors was like stepping into a world of controlled, artificial twilight. The first shock was the temperature, a constant, cool climate maintained independently of the desert's extremes outside. The air smelled of ozone, metal, and the faint, clean scent of industrial-grade filters. Lazar described entering a long, wide-access corridor that ran the length of the complex, a central artery lit by recessed fluorescent tubes that cast a shadowless, even light. This main corridor was eerily quiet, its concrete floor polished to a dull sheen, and it served as the spine from which the individual hangar bays, numbered 1 through 9, branched off like ribs. The silence was punctuated only by the soft hum of environmental systems and the occasional, muted echo of a distant door. Each hangar bay was accessed through its own heavy, vault-like door, operated by a secure keypad or card reader. Inside, the space was vast, high-ceilinged, and utterly utilitarian. The walls and ceiling were unfinished concrete and rock, the raw guts of the mountain itself, with conduits and pipes running along the upper reaches. The lighting here was brighter, focused downward from arrays of powerful lamps, creating pools of intense illumination on the main floor where the craft sat, leaving the peripheral areas in deep shadow. The atmosphere was sterile and surgical, reminding Lazar more of a clean room or an advanced museum storage facility than a typical aircraft hangar. There was no clutter, no scattered tools, no sense of frantic work. Everything was precise, ordered, and silent. The sport model occupied one of these bays, but its specific location, which bay number, was a detail Lazar either couldn't recall or deliberately omitted for verification purposes. What was clear was its presentation. It sat alone in the center of its bay, under the brightest lights, as if it were the primary specimen under examination. Around it, the floor was marked with caution lines and had electrical outlets and data ports set into it, suggesting connections for monitoring equipment. The craft was the undeniable focal point, the jewel in this subterranean setting. Its polished, seamless surface stood in stark contrast to the rough, textured concrete of the mountain walls behind it, a symbol of impossible elegance housed within brute, functional secrecy. Security was omnipresent but subtly woven into the environment. Lazar mentioned seeing few armed guards inside the hangars themselves. The real security was in the access. All personnel wore color-coded badges that dictated which doors they could open. Cameras were positioned at junctions and in the corners of the bays, their small, dark lenses watching unblinkingly. The most palpable security measure was the culture itself, an unspoken understanding that you observed, you worked on your specific task, and you did not ask questions outside your purview. Conversations were minimal and task-oriented. There was no camaraderie, no casual discussion about the incredible objects in the room. The emotional temperature of the place was kept as controlled as the air. Other personnel were spectral figures in this landscape. Lazar described seeing small teams of technicians, usually 2 or 3 people, working at stations with oscilloscopes and other diagnostic equipment, their backs to the craft as they studied waveforms on screens. They wore casual clothes or lab coats, not military uniforms. There were also what he called suits, men in bland, civilian attire who seemed to be overseers or scientists, observing rather than doing. Interactions were limited. No one offered a name. No one explained what they were doing. Each person was an island of specific knowledge, moving through the hangar with a quiet, focused purpose, as if disassembling a dream with spreadsheets and multimeters. The social atmosphere was one of intense, shared compartmentalization. The entire complex felt like a library of mysteries, with each hangar bay serving as a separate reading room for a different, incomprehensible text. The sheer scale of the operation, 9 bays built into a mountainside, suggested a program of significant, long-term investment and scope. This was not a temporary storage shed for a single crash artifact. It was a permanent, dedicated research installation, implying a sustained effort to understand not just one object, but potentially a collection of them. The sterile quiet, the focused lighting, the sense of hushed, deliberate study. It all painted a picture of a place where humanity was slowly, painstakingly, trying to learn a new alphabet of physics, one glyph at a time. The sport model was the clearest, most intact chapter. But the presence of multiple bays, the hum of activity, and the vague shapes glimpsed in other spaces hinted that the sport model wasn't the only craft there, nor was it necessarily the only story waiting to be deciphered in that silent mountain vault. The central corridor of S4 was a gallery of the unknown. While Lazar's direct work focused on the sport model, glimpses into other open hangar bays or conversations overheard in hushed tones suggested a collection. This was not a single trophy room, but a comparative study lab for multiple, distinct artifacts of non-human origin. The implication was staggering. If true, it meant that whatever was happening at S4 wasn't the result of a single, lucky find like Roswell, but pointed toward a longer, more complex history of interaction and retrieval. The very architecture of the place, 9 identical bays, spoke of a program designed to handle multiple specimens, a systematic approach to the profoundly unsystematic. Lazar's descriptions of the other vehicles were fleeting, like catching sight of something strange from the corner of your eye. He mentioned other disc-shaped objects, but not carbon copies of the sport model. Some appeared larger, their diameters possibly reaching 60 or 70 feet, with more pronounced central domes or different surface textures. Others seemed older, their once sleek lines marred by what looked like impact damage or weathering of a type not known on Earth, perhaps from atmospheric entry on a different world or from some conflict in the depths of space. The variety in size and configuration was the first clue that challenged a monolithic view of the aliens. It suggested different purposes, different origins, or different technological generations. The most telling detail was the condition of these crafts. While the sport model sat in its bay in a state of pristine, almost mocking perfection, other bays housed vehicles that looked battered, breached, or incomplete. Some appeared as if they had been violently opened, with sections of hull peeled back like the skin of a fruit, revealing internal structures that were chaotic tangles of unfamiliar components. Others were mere large fragments, suggesting a catastrophic event that had scattered debris over a wide area, which had then been painstakingly collected and reassembled like the world's most expensive and perplexing jigsaw puzzle. This visual evidence, the contrast between the intact sport model and the damaged others, fueled the narrative of multiple crash and retrieval events over an unknown span of time. This implied fleet, even in its fragmentary state, transformed S4 from a singular mystery into a potential archive of cosmic contact. The presence of multiple distinct craft suggested multiple sources, or at the very least, multiple visitation events from the same source over a long timeline. It painted a picture not of a one-time accident, but of an ongoing phenomenon, something that had happened before and might happen again. The facility's purpose then expanded. It wasn't just about reverse engineering a vehicle. It was about comparative analysis, trying to find common technological threads, shared materials, or consistent design principles across different models, as an archaeologist would compare pottery shards from different eras to understand a lost civilization. What did this mean about the nature of contact? The damaged crafts whispered of fallibility. They suggested that whoever or whatever was piloting these technological marvels was not infallible. They could crash. Their systems could fail. They could, perhaps, be shot down. This introduced a humanizing, or at least immortalizing, element to the seemingly godlike technology. The intact sport model, meanwhile, raised other, more unsettling possibilities. Was it captured? Did it land intentionally? Was it a gift, or a scout that simply never went home? The collection as a whole refused to give a single, clear answer about the intent behind the visitation. It presented a mosaic of scenarios, some accidental, some perhaps intentional, all deeply enigmatic. Each craft, therefore, was not just an engineering puzzle. It was a potential data capsule from a different story. A heavily damaged disk might tell a story of a desperate, failed mission, or a violent interception. A larger craft might hint at longer journeys or different cargo. The sport model, sleek and operational, could represent a standard-issue vehicle for a specific, common task. Together, they formed a silent fleet grounded in the Nevada desert, a fleet whose combined testimony could rewrite human history, cosmology, and our understanding of life in the universe. But without the context of their origin, their purpose, or the beings who built them, they were like pages torn from a dozen different books in an alien library, scattered on a table. You could see they were written in the same general script, but the stories they told, and the authors who wrote them, remained frustratingly, tantalizingly out of reach. Each craft told a different story of arrival, of technology, and perhaps of intention. But whose stories were they, and why had so many chapters ended up buried in the same secret desert mountain? To navigate the physical reality of the craft, Lazar claimed he was given a conceptual map, a series of classified briefings and documents. These were not handed out freely, but provided on a strict need-to-know basis, often just before he was to begin work on a specific system. The materials themselves had a stark, bureaucratic authenticity. He described them as contained in simple blue folders, the kind found in any government office, but stamped with severe warnings and classification levels like majestic or above top secret. This mundanity of presentation made their contents all the more shocking. It was the dry, clinical language of officialdom applied to subjects that belonged in mythology. The briefing papers were, according to Lazar, technical in nature but fragmentary. They contained schematic-like diagrams of the sport model's internal layout, focusing on the reactor core and the gravity amplifier conduits. These diagrams were not detailed blueprints, but simplified flow charts, indicating energy pathways and component relationships without revealing the underlying physics. The text accompanying them was sparse and matter-of-fact, using terms like gravity generation source, spatial displacement emitters, and biological entity containment. There were no exclamation points, no speculative notes. The language treated the craft as a piece of foreign hardware to be understood, not as a world-shattering revelation. This clinical tone was perhaps the most convincing aspect to Lazar. The documents didn't try to amaze, they tried to inform, within very narrow parameters. Interspersed with the technical data were more startling references. The term extraterrestrial biological entities, or EBs, appeared. Lazar described reading brief mentions of these entities in the context of craft recovery operations. The documents did not describe them in sensational detail, but referred to them in the same detached way one might refer to a flight crew or a vehicle's occupants. There were references to their physiological differences, smaller stature, different metabolic processes, and to procedures for handling biological materials associated with them. The implication was clear and chilling. The craft were not drones. They had been piloted, and the pilots, living or deceased, had also been part of the retrieval and study program, treated as another component of the captured technology. Perhaps the most profound elements were the historical summaries. Lazar claimed the documents made reference to multiple contact and crash events spanning decades, situating the work at S4 within a longer, hidden timeline. Roswell was mentioned not as a singular, bizarre incident, but as one entry in a catalog. Other events, locations, and dates were listed, names of places he'd never heard associated with the phenomenon before. These summaries presented the phenomenon as an ongoing, documented reality for a select group within the military and intelligence community. The language suggested a continuous effort at assessment and containment, analyzing each event not for its existential meaning, but for its intelligence value and potential technological yield. A key characteristic of these documents was their pervasive redaction. Whole paragraphs or pages would be blacked out, or entire sections withheld. Lazar was given only the slices of information directly relevant to his assigned engineering task. He described the frustration of seeing a fascinating diagram or a provocative heading, only to find the explanatory text completely obscured by thick, black ink. This selective disclosure reinforced the compartmentalization. It ensured that even someone with high-level clearance, like he claimed to have, only ever saw a tiny pixel of the bigger picture. The full history, the origin theories, the conclusions drawn from studying the EBs, all of that was kept behind additional, impassable walls of classification. He was given the how of a specific subsystem, but never the who, the why, or the from where. This limited access itself became a telling detail. It painted a picture of a bureaucracy managing the unmanageable. The system was designed not to enlighten its workers, but to use their specialized skills while protecting the overarching truth. Lazar was a technician brought in to probe a specific problem. He was not a historian granted access to the archives. The documents he saw were likely sanitized versions, stripped of context to serve a utilitarian purpose. This explained why his testimony is rich in technical description but vague on broader narrative. He was only fed the technical descriptions. The briefings were not about unveiling a grand truth, but about providing just enough information to make a specialized brain produce useful work on an unfathomable machine. The cumulative effect of these briefings, as described, is what adds a layer of sobering credibility to an otherwise fantastic story. They suggest a paper trail, a hidden historiography. They point to a secret world where the impossible had been filed, indexed, and turned into the subject of meetings and memoranda. If fabricated, the details of blue folders, redacted text, and clinical jargon show an intuitive understanding of how real secrecy operates. not with dramatic flair, but with crushing banality. If authentic, they represent the smoking gun of a century's greatest secret, not merely the existence of the crafts, but the existence of a formal, institutional knowledge of them, a knowledge carefully distributed in fragments to prevent anyone from seeing the whole, terrifying, beautiful picture. The documents, as Lazar recounted them, suggested a hidden history of contact and retrieval, a parallel curriculum of human experience we were never taught, written in the dry prose of official secrecy and filed away in a mountain, far from the light of day. Reverse engineering is, at its heart, a process of educated backtracking. It is the art of taking a finished, functional product and carefully dismantling it, not just physically, but intellectually, to uncover the principles and processes that brought it into being. It's how we learn from our competitors, our predecessors, and sometimes from our own past. The goal is to move from what it does to how it does it, and finally to how we can do it too. In the context of S4, if Lazar's account is to be believed, this standard process met its ultimate challenge. The government's alleged program wasn't trying to crack a rival nation's jet engine. It was attempting to decompile the technology of a civilization that operated on a fundamentally different understanding of the universe. The challenges were monumental and began at the most basic level. With terrestrial technology, even the most advanced, engineers share a common foundational language: electricity, magnetism, thermodynamics, material science. They know what a wire is, what a semiconductor does, why a turbine blade has a specific shape. With the sport model, that shared dictionary was useless. The crafts were built with materials of unknown composition and origin. Their power source, element 115, was not just a new battery chemistry. It was a substance that seemed to interact with gravity itself, a force we can measure but cannot yet manipulate. The propulsion system had no moving parts, no exhaust, no intake. It was like trying to reverse engineer a light bulb if you had no concept of electricity, glass, or vacuum seals. Lazar's specific role, as he described it, was that of a diagnostician on the propulsion system. He wasn't designing, he was probing. His tasks involved using standard electronic test equipment, oscilloscopes, signal generators, spectrum analyzers, to try and map the energy flows within the reactor and amplifier systems. He'd attach probes to connection points, which were not standard ports, but likely points of physical contact, and try to interpret the resulting waveforms. The frustration was immense. The signals he saw didn't correspond to any known electromagnetic profiles. They were patterns of energy that seemed to pulse in ways that defied conventional waveform analysis, suggesting they were carriers for effects our science doesn't yet have instruments to measure directly. Progress was glacial, not for lack of brilliance, but because the team was, in essence, trying to read a book in a language they didn't know, using a dictionary written in a third, equally unknown language. Every assumption was wrong. Standard safety protocols were inadequate because they didn't know what the hazards were. Standard diagnostic approaches failed because they were looking for the wrong things. The work was characterized by moments of tantalizing insight followed by long periods of baffled stagnation. They could observe the craft's awesome capabilities during test flights, but connecting those capabilities to the squiggly lines on their oscilloscope screens was a leap they couldn't consistently make. This was the core of the frustration, working with unknown physics. They weren't just missing a piece of the puzzle. They were missing the picture on the box the puzzle came in. Gravity control was a theoretical concept, a distant dream in physics departments. At S4, Lazar claimed, it was a working technology sitting in a hangar, but its operating manual was written in the language of a science we had not yet invented. The engineers and physicists there were the most forward-thinking of their generation, yet they were like Renaissance scholars presented with a smartphone. They could intuit it was a communication device. They could see it light up, but the concepts of software, binary code, and cellular networks were simply beyond their conceptual horizon. They were trying to understand, to replicate, and to harness a technology that was not just years, but perhaps centuries or even millennia ahead of anything in the human technological lineage. The gap wasn't one of degree, but of kind. For all the hours spent in sterile hangars staring at unreadable instrument panels, the true, undeniable proof of what they were dealing with happened outside, under the open desert sky. Lazar claimed that every Wednesday night, like clockwork, a test flight was conducted. These weren't demonstrations for visitors, but functional checks, perhaps to maintain system integrity or to gather flight data. For the personnel, it was the weekly reminder that their frustrating, abstract work inside was connected to something breathtakingly real. They would be taken to a viewing area on the base, a remote pad, or a hillside clearing, and the desert night would become their theater. The craft's movement was the first and most definitive break from reality. When it lifted from the ground, there was no roar, no blast of heat, no plume of dust kicked up by downdraft. It simply ascended. It was a smooth, silent transition from resting on the earth to hovering a few feet above it, as if the very concept of weight had been politely switched off. The initial motion was often a gentle, rocking wobble, a side-to-side oscillation that Lazar likened to a gyroscope finding its balance. This wobble, he suggested, might have been the gravity amplifiers cycling up and syncing their fields, a visual signature of the system coming online. Then, the wobble would cease, and the craft would hang in the air with an impossible stillness, a solid object defying gravity in utter silence. Once in controlled flight, the demonstrations of its capabilities were what erased any lingering thoughts of terrestrial prototypes. The craft could accelerate from a dead hover to a velocity that made it vanish from sight in the blink of an eye, with no sonic boom, no gradual buildup of speed. It was as if it deleted the intervening space between 2 points. It could execute right-angle turns without slowing, tracing a perfect L in the sky, a maneuver that would subject any known aircraft and its pilot to catastrophic G-forces. It could stop instantly from high speed, going from a streaking blur to a stationary hover with no coasting or braking arc. Its flight path looked less like aerodynamics and more like geometry, straight lines and sharp angles drawn by an invisible hand. The silence was as profound as the motion. In the vast quiet of the desert, the only sounds were the natural ones, the whisper of the wind, the distant call of a coyote. The craft added nothing to this soundscape. Its propulsion made no noise because, according to the theory, it wasn't pushing against the air. It was manipulating the space-time field around itself, so there was no turbulent air to vibrate and create sound. This acoustic absence was deeply unsettling. It violated the deep-seated expectation that something so powerful must roar. Its power was expressed not in decibels, but in silent, visual defiance. A key sensory detail was the glow. Lazar consistently described an orange-pink light emanating from underneath the craft during operation. This wasn't the fiery exhaust of a rocket, but a softer, more contained luminescence that seemed to pulse in rhythm with its movements. During the signature wobble, the glow would pulse gently. During sudden acceleration, it would intensify, casting an otherworldly, sunset-colored hue on the ground directly below before the craft streaked away. This glow was the only visible output of the incomprehensible reactions happening in its reactor core, a beautiful and haunting visual marker of its active state. For Lazar, a trained physicist with a skeptic's mind for systems, these demonstrations were the tipping point. Reading documents in a blue folder could be part of an elaborate ruse. Studying strange components in a hangar could be an exercise in misdirection. But standing in the cold desert air, watching a solid object perform these silent, physics-defying ballets week after week, was an experiential truth that bypassed intellect and struck directly at perception. It was evidence you absorbed through your eyes and felt in your gut. The sheer consistency of the performances, their repeatable, test flight nature, stripped away the last vestiges of doubt. He wasn't looking at a hologram or a secret human project that mimicked these effects. He was looking at the genuine article, a technology that played by a different set of rules. Seeing it move, silently carving impossible shapes into the fabric of the night, erased all doubt about its origin. The only question that remained was whether humanity could ever hope to learn its language. The flight demonstrations presented a living paradox, a set of observables that stood in direct contradiction to the foundational laws of physics as we have painstakingly built them. Newton's first law of motion states that an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion, unless acted upon by an external force. The sport model laughed at this premise. It could initiate motion from a dead stop without any visible external force acting upon it, and it could cease that motion just as abruptly. According to Newtonian physics, such instantaneous acceleration or deceleration would require an infinite force, which is impossible. Yet, there it was, happening in the Nevada sky. The craft behaved as if it could simply decide its own inertial reference frame, independent of the universe around it. Einstein's theory of general relativity, which describes gravity as the curvature of space-time caused by mass and energy, also seemed inadequate. The craft created and controlled intense gravitational fields, but without the corresponding colossal mass. According to Einstein, to warp space-time sufficiently for the effects Lazar described, you would need the mass-energy equivalent of a small star concentrated in a tiny volume, a scenario that would create a black hole, not a flying disk. The sport model suggested a method of generating a gravitational field that was decoupled from mass in the traditional sense. It pointed toward a physics where gravity could be a phenomenon that could be induced or projected electronically or nuclearly, a concept that remains purely theoretical, often called gravito-electromagnetism, or part of a quantized theory of gravity that has eluded unification for a century. This ties directly into the concept of gravity as a wave, a confirmation of Einstein's later predictions, but taken to an extreme utility. We have now confirmed the existence of gravitational waves from cosmic events like colliding black holes, ripples in space-time that travel at the speed of light. The sport model's technology, as described, seemed to use its amplifiers to create controlled, coherent gravitational waves. Instead of chaotic ripples from a distant collision, it would generate a focused, shaped gravitational field, a standing wave, or a directed slope in spacetime that it could then surf. This is the heart of the proposed propulsion, not moving through space, but moving space itself around the stationary craft. It's a concept mirrored in the theoretical Alcubierre warp drive, where spacetime in front of the vessel is contracted and spacetime behind it is expanded, creating a wave that carries the vessel faster than light could travel in normal space. The sport model appeared to be a practical implementation of this staggeringly advanced principle. The implications for faster-than-light travel are inherent in this model. If you can compress the space in front of you, the distance to your destination effectively shrinks. You are not breaking the universal speed limit of light within your local spacetime bubble. You are shortening the road. This resolves the paradox of interstellar travel within a human lifetime. The craft, as witnessed, demonstrated the local control of gravity and inertia necessary for such a system. The sudden accelerations and right-angle turns were local effects, the craft maneuvering within its own generated spacetime bubble. The potential for interstellar leaps was the logical, terrifying, and magnificent extension of the same technology. Unsurprisingly, when such ideas leaked into the public through Lazar, the mainstream scientific community largely dismissed them. The claims violated too many established principles and came from a source with disputed credentials. Serious physicists who did engage did so to debunk, pointing out the energy requirements, the lack of a unified theory, and the absence of any peer-reviewed evidence. A handful, however, Those working on the fringes of gravitation and advanced propulsion listened with keen interest. They recognized in Lazar's descriptions the wobble, the gravity amplifiers, the focused field, concepts that aligned with their own speculative papers. For them, the story wasn't proof, but a fascinating data point, a detailed anecdote that matched the predicted behavior of a gravity control system. For Lazar himself, this created a profound intellectual isolation. He was privy to a reality that shattered his formal education, yet he had no legitimate academic or professional forum in which to discuss it. He couldn't publish a paper. He couldn't debate the finer points of gravitational field shaping with colleagues over coffee. The only people who shared this reality were bound by the same secrecy oaths. His understanding was trapped in a vacuum, unable to be tested, refined, or validated by the scientific method he respected. He was living a physicist's dream and nightmare simultaneously, seeing evidence of a new physics, but being unable to contribute to its formal discovery. If his observations were correct, then the textbooks he'd studied, the equations he'd learned, were not wrong, but woefully incomplete. They described a local subset of reality, a flatland, while he had glimpsed the third dimension. The paradox wasn't in the craft. It was in the human mind trying to comprehend it with tools not yet designed for the task. In 1989, when Bob Lazar first spoke of element 115 as a stable, metallic fuel source for a gravity propulsion system, he was making a claim that straddled the line between prescience and absurdity. The periodic table ended at element 109. The very concept of an element with 115 protons was speculative, residing in the realm of super-heavy elements that theory suggested might be too unstable to exist for more than a fraction of a second. Mainstream physicists dismissed the claim outright. To them, it was a clear marker of a hoax. The speaker had chosen a science-fictional number that sounded impressive but was demonstrably impossible, revealing his story as fabrication to anyone with a basic knowledge of nuclear chemistry. Lazar's detailed description of its properties, a stable, machinable metal, was, in their view, the final nail in the coffin of his credibility. The scientific reaction at the time was rooted in the island of stability theory. This hypothesis suggested that certain super-heavy elements, with specific magic numbers of protons and neutrons, might have significantly longer half-lives, perhaps minutes, days, or even years, compared to the milliseconds of their neighbors. However, even the most optimistic predictions did not envision the kind of bulk, stable material Lazar described. The technology to attempt synthesis was in its infancy. The consensus was that if 115 were ever created, it would be a handful of atoms surviving for less than a second before decaying into lighter elements. A stable, triangle-shaped wafer of the stuff was pure fantasy. Then, history performed a slow, deliberate pivot. In 2003, a team of Russian and American scientists at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in Dubna announced they had synthesized a few atoms of element 115. They achieved this by bombarding a target of americium-243 with a beam of calcium-48 ions. The resulting atoms of moscovium, as it was officially named in 2016, existed for approximately 220 milliseconds before decaying. The scientific achievement was monumental, a triumph of human ingenuity that expanded the periodic table. But for followers of the Lazar story, it was a seismic event. The impossible number was now real. The element existed. Lazar had named it, in public, 14 years before its official creation. This development forced a nuanced reassessment. Scientists rightly and quickly pointed out the stark differences. The synthesized moscovium-288 was wildly unstable, a fleeting whisper of matter. Lazar had described a stable isotope of element 115. Isotopes are variants of an element with different numbers of neutrons. Some can be stable while others are not. The existence of one unstable isotope does not prove a stable one exists, but it does not disprove it either. It opens the door to the possibility. Proponents argued that the synthesized version was not the specific isotope used in the sport model, just as carbon-14, unstable, is different from carbon-12, 12 stable. They posited that the alleged stable isotope existed in a predicted island of stability, with a specific neutron count our labs have not yet achieved. Modern science, as of today, has not created a stable isotope of element 115. The quest continues in advanced particle accelerators around the world. Scientists involved in super-heavy element research are understandably cautious. They view Lazar's claims with deep skepticism, noting the lack of any physical evidence or theoretical pathway to the kind of stability he described for a technological application. They see the 1989 claim as a lucky guess, a coincidence amplified by confirmation bias. The official narrative remains: Moscovium is a fascinating, ephemeral laboratory creation, not a power source. Yet, the coincidence is undeniably provocative. In the vast landscape of possible numbers, Lazar specifically named 115. He didn't say 116 or 120 or a vague, heavy element. He gave a precise atomic number that was, at the time, a placeholder for the unknown. The subsequent discovery did not validate his entire story, but it transformed one of its most easily mocked details from a mark of fraud into a point of intriguing speculation. It forced a question: if he was wrong about everything, how did he correctly identify an element that wouldn't be confirmed for over a decade? Was it an astonishingly lucky stab in the dark, or was it a piece of classified information that slipped out from behind the security fence? This single detail acts as a tether, connecting his fantastic narrative to the hard, peer-reviewed reality of the modern periodic table. Decades after his controversial testimony, on the specific point of element 115's existence, he was proven partially right by the very scientific establishment that dismissed him. This undeniable fact hangs in the air, a quiet, persistent echo that leads to a deeper, more unsettling question. If the most outlandish detail of his story has a basis in our confirmed reality, what else was he right about? The weight of a secret is measured not in pounds, but in silences. For Bob Lazar, the secret became a constant, humming pressure in his daily life. He moved between two worlds: the surreal, clinical environment of S4, where he touched technology that redefined possibility, and the ordinary world of Las Vegas, where he paid bills and tried to maintain a normal existence. This dissonance was unsustainable. The decision to go public wasn't born from a desire for fame or a dramatic impulse. It emerged slowly, like a crack spreading through a dam, fueled by a deepening moral and scientific conviction. He began to believe that the technology he was helping to study, a potential solution to energy crises, a key to the stars, was being deliberately buried for reasons of control, not security. His initial hesitation was rooted in primal fear. He had signed draconian secrecy agreements. He understood the power and reach of the entities behind the program. The risks were not abstract. They were promises of legal destruction, financial ruin, and personal danger. The fear was a physical thing, a tightness in the chest when an unmarked car lingered too long on his street, a pause before answering the phone. To speak meant voluntarily stepping into a crossfire of ridicule and retribution. He knew his life, as he knew it, would be over. The comfortable anonymity of being a physicist with a photo lab would evaporate, replaced by the glaring, distorting spotlight of public controversy. Conversations with those closest to him were fraught with tension. Confiding in his then-wife, Tracy, or a trusted friend meant burdening them with the same dangerous knowledge and implicating them in his dilemma. These discussions were not strategic planning sessions, but expressions of a profound personal crisis. He was weighing the safety and stability of his private life against what he perceived as a duty to a greater truth. The moral weight was immense. Was his oath of secrecy to a government project more binding than a perceived duty to humanity's scientific and existential progress? He grappled with the idea that by staying silent, he was complicit in hoarding a cosmic inheritance. The tipping point was not a single event, but the erosion of his ability to live with the contradiction. Watching the Wednesday night test flights, seeing the silent, orange glow paint impossible geometries on the desert sky, he felt a growing certainty that this was too important to belong to a closed circle of security-cleared personnel. The potential benefits, from limitless clean energy to revolutionizing space travel, felt like a human birthright being held in a classified trust. His scientific mind rebelled against the suppression of knowledge. The moral imperative to share what he had seen began to outweigh the fear of the consequences. Contacting investigative journalist George Knapp was the first concrete step across the Rubicon. He didn't choose a tabloid or a sensationalist TV show. He chose a respected journalist with a reputation for dogged, serious investigation in Las Vegas. This was a deliberate choice, signaling that he wanted his story documented and investigated, not simply sensationalized. The initial contact was cautious, likely filled with coded language and mutual assessment. Lazar needed to know if Knapp was someone who would listen carefully and verify what he could, not just someone hunting for ratings. In Knapp, he found a partner willing to navigate the labyrinth. That first meeting, the moment he began to verbally transfer the images from his mind, the hangars, the sport model, Element 115, into the recordable world, was the point of no return. The secret was no longer his alone. It was now shared, and in being shared, it became a live entity in the world, capable of taking on a life of its own. There was a finality to it, like releasing a bird from a cage. You could never truly get it back. The act of speaking those words aloud to another person, of making the invisible visible, severed him from his old life. The safety of silence was gone, replaced by the terrifying and uncertain path of a whistleblower. Once he spoke, there was no going back to the quiet man with the secret. He was now, forever, Bob Lazar, the man who said he worked on alien spacecraft at Area 51. The setting for the unveiling was deliberately understated, amplifying the strangeness of the words spoken. It was not a primetime network special, but a local news report on Class TV in Las Vegas. Investigative journalist George Knapp conducted the interview, his demeanor a blend of professional skepticism and clear intrigue. The most iconic visual from that first broadcast was Lazar himself, or rather, the silhouette of him. To protect his identity initially, he was filmed in shadow, his features blurred, his voice subtly altered. This image, a man-shaped void speaking impossible truths, became instantly emblematic. It visually represented the core of the story, a hidden source revealing hidden things, a shadow speaking of shadows. In that initial, shadowy interview, Lazar made revelations that sent shockwaves through the nascent internet and the established UFO community. He didn't just say he saw a UFO, he provided a workplace. He named S4 near Papoose Lake as the secret site. He described the sport model in specific technical detail, its size, its seamless construction, its lack of conventional controls. He introduced the world to Element 115 as its power source and outlined the gravity wave propulsion theory. He spoke of extraterrestrial biological entities and of briefing documents that treated interstellar travel as a classified engineering problem. This was not a vague story of an abduction or a light in the sky. It was a detailed insider account of a reverse engineering program, complete with a location, a methodology, and a physics hypothesis. The public reaction the next day, and in the following weeks, was a study in polarized reality. In Las Vegas and among UFO enthusiasts nationwide, the interview was a seismic event. Here was a seemingly credible source, a physicist speaking in calm, technical terms, corroborating the deepest hopes and fears of the community. The phone lines at CLOS and UFO research organizations rang nonstop. Copies of the broadcast were duplicated and circulated on VHS tapes, becoming prized artifacts. For believers, it was the missing link, the smoking gun testimony they had been waiting for since Roswell. It transformed Area 51 from a subject of speculation into a specific destination for the truth. The UFO community's response was immediate and fervent, but not monolithic. Longtime researchers like John Lear, who had been circulating similar ideas in private circles, saw Lazar as a courageous validation. Others were more cautious, waiting for corroboration. The community began its own investigation, attempting to verify Lazar's background, scouring maps for Papoose Lake, and analyzing every technical claim. The interview acted as a catalyst, galvanizing research and debate with a new intensity and a new set of specific, testable details to examine. Mainstream media and the scientific establishment, however, responded with a wall of dismissal. Major newspapers and networks either ignored the story entirely or relegated it to the weird news section with a tone of amused contempt. When they did engage, it was to frame it as a classic UFO hoax. Scientists interviewed uniformly dismissed the claims, particularly about element 115, as impossible, pointing to Lazar's then unverifiable educational credentials as proof of his fraudulence. The official government position was, and remains, a blanket no comment on Area 51 specifics, which the media interpreted as an implicit denial. The dominant narrative in respectable circles became one of debunking. The story was too outrageous, the source too questionable, the implications too world-shattering to be taken seriously. This created a surreal dichotomy. In one world, on late-night talk radio, in UFO magazines, and in living rooms where the Kloss tape was played, Lazar's interview was groundbreaking evidence. In the other world, of newspapers, university halls, and network news desks, it was a non-story, a curiosity not worthy of serious journalistic or scientific attention. Lazar found himself in the gap between these two worlds, hailed as a hero by one and scorned as a fraud by the other. The interview had succeeded in broadcasting the message, but it had failed to bridge the credibility chasm. It forced people to choose which reality to inhabit. The world, or at least a significant part of it fascinated by the unknown, was listening intently, captivated by the specificity and calm delivery of the claims. But the crucial, nagging question lingered in the air, asked by skeptics and believers alike, shaping the decades of controversy to come. Was anyone with the power to change the official story actually believing him? Following the public explosion of his story, the backlash was not a haphazard wave of criticism, but a targeted, multi-pronged operation that seemed designed for a specific outcome: the complete erasure of Bob Lazar's credibility. The first and most powerful tool was the official silence, weaponized. Government agencies, primarily the Department of Energy and the Air Force, issued blanket denials about the specifics of Lazar's employment and the existence of any such program at S4. They did not engage with the technical details of his story. They simply stated he was not who he claimed to be and had no association with the sensitive work he described. This monolithic, impersonal denial carried the weight of the state, creating a formidable wall of official truth against which his personal testimony seemed feeble. The discrediting campaign then moved to his past. Almost immediately, investigators and journalists trying to verify Lazar's background hit a series of dead ends that felt suspiciously convenient for his detractors. He claimed to have degrees from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the California Institute of Technology. When contacted, both prestigious institutions had no record of a Robert Lazar or Bob Lazar ever attending, let alone graduating. His employment history at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, which he cited as part of his scientific pedigree, was also murky. While a phone directory from the lab was produced showing a Robert Lazar listed as a physicist, officials stated he was merely a contractor for Kirkmeyer, a defense subcontractor, doing work unrelated to advanced physics. The narrative crafted was of a man inflating a minor technical role into a grand scientific career. The most chilling aspect of the backlash was the alleged disappearance of records that should have been mundane and permanent. Lazar asserted that after he went public, his Social Security number began returning no records found in certain verification systems. His high school records from New York became difficult to obtain. It was as if his formal, paper trail identity was being systematically scrubbed or obscured. This went beyond character assassination. It suggested an active effort to retroactively dismantle the documentary evidence of his life, making him into a non-person in the bureaucratic sense, a ghost whose past could not be proven. For a whistleblower, this is a profoundly isolating tactic. It doesn't just attack your story, it attacks your very existence. Simultaneously, a campaign of harassment and intimidation began, according to Lazar and those close to him. He reported being followed by unmarked cars. His home was burglarized in a manner that suggested professionals. Nothing of obvious value was taken, but papers and personal items were disturbed. He and his wife received threatening phone calls. The message was clear and psychologically potent. He was being watched, and his actions had consequences that extended to his personal safety and that of his family. This atmosphere of threat served to isolate him further, making potential allies think twice about supporting him and draining his personal resources through constant vigilance. The systematic dismantling of his credibility was remarkably effective in the court of public opinion. For the casual observer or the skeptical journalist, the story became simple. A man tells an incredible tale about alien spacecraft, and then it's discovered his claimed educational background is a fabrication. The conclusion seemed obvious. The story must therefore be a fabrication too. The more complex, nuanced questions: why would a hoaxer choose such specific, technical, and ultimately risky details? Why would he go to a serious journalist instead of a tabloid? Were often lost. The missing degrees became the master key that, for many, unlocked the entire case and dismissed it as a fraud. Yet, this very ferocity and thoroughness of the backlash planted seeds of doubt in the opposite direction for others. The reaction seemed disproportionate. If Lazar was simply a liar or a confused fantasist, the standard procedure would be to ignore him or issue a simple denial. His story would fade into the background noise of UFO claims. But the response appeared coordinated and deep, reaching into his past and present. It prompted a compelling counter-question: why try so unbelievably hard to erase and discredit one man if his story was merely the ramblings of a nobody? If he was lying, his claims would collapse under their own weight upon investigation. The intense, multi-agency effort suggested that his story, true or not, had struck a nerve in a powerful, hidden system. The backlash, intended to silence, ended up fueling the mystery for decades, creating a permanent question mark over the motives behind the effort to destroy his name. They wanted to erase him from the record, to make him a cautionary tale for other potential whistleblowers. But in their zeal, they inadvertently made his central premise more compelling: that he had touched something so sensitive that the guardians of the secret felt compelled to use every tool at their disposal to make him, and his truth, disappear. For over 3 decades, Bob Lazar has existed in a unique and taxing space in our culture, a permanent subject of scrutiny. Every interview, every podcast appearance, every documentary is dissected not just for new information, but for inconsistencies with his 1989 account. The remarkable aspect, noted by supporters and detractors alike, is the bedrock consistency of his narrative. The core details, S4, the sport model's appearance, the 3 gravity amplifiers, element 115, the Wednesday test flights, have remained unchanged. He has not embellished the story with new, sensational twists over the years. When asked, he often expresses frustration at having to repeat the same information, stating he came forward to share what he saw, not to build a career as a UFO personality. This steadfastness is, for some, a sign of honesty, for others, It's evidence of a well-rehearsed fiction. The personal cost of his whistleblowing has been profound and multifaceted. His first marriage ended under the strain. The promised quiet life of a scientist evaporated, replaced by a lifelong notoriety that is both a platform and a prison. Financial stability was disrupted by the controversy, forcing him to rebuild through his scientific mind, leading to his successful company, United Nuclear, which sells scientific equipment and rare materials. Yet, even this entrepreneurial success is often cynically framed by critics as profiting from his fame, a catch-22 where any attempt at a normal career is viewed through the lens of his story. He traded anonymity for a life where his name is forever synonymous with one of the world's biggest what-ifs. In rebuilding his life, Lazar has largely retreated from the spotlight center. He is not a regular on the conference circuit. He doesn't actively seek media attention. Interviews are granted sparingly, often to trusted figures like George Knapp or for projects he feels are serious. This reluctance reads not as the behavior of a fame seeker, but of someone weary of the circus that grew around his painful decision. He focuses on his work, his family, and his personal interests in cars and propulsion, carving out a slice of normalcy within the enduring storm of his own making. The UFO community's opinion of him remains its own microcosm of the wider debate. He is a polarizing figure. To a significant faction, he is the most important whistleblower in history, the man who provided the technical blueprint for the phenomenon. They point to the element 115 validation and his unshakable story as proof. To others, he is a problematic figure, a distraction whose disputed background allows the entire topic to be easily dismissed by skeptics. Some resent that his story came to dominate the conversation for years, overshadowing other research and witnesses. He is both a cornerstone and a fracture point within the community that should be his natural home. His underlying motivation for maintaining the story, after all this time and cost, is perhaps the most human element. In interviews, he rarely expresses anger or a desire for vindication in a triumphant sense. Instead, he often conveys a sense of resigned duty. He has said, in essence, that he told the truth about what he witnessed, and that's all he can do. The burden is not in continuing to convince people, but in carrying the knowledge itself. To recant would be to betray his own experience, to declare that the awe he felt in that hangar and under those test flight skies was a lie. For a man who identifies as a scientist, that would be a betrayal of observation itself. So, he continues, not as a charismatic evangelist for the extraterrestrial hypothesis, but as a reluctant reference point. He answers questions when asked, often with the same technical descriptions, the same diagrams drawn from memory. He seems less interested in being believed and more in being a consistent source, a fixed point in a shifting debate. This persistence over 30-plus years, in the face of immense personal sacrifice and relentless criticism, circles back to the fundamental puzzle. What inner compass, what unshakable core of conviction, could compel a person to endure such a lifetime of scrutiny and doubt for a story that brought him so much trouble? For over 3 decades, through every backlash and every attempt to bury his past, his story hasn't changed in its essential architecture. The question that naturally follows, the one that gives his testimony its enduring power, is simple yet profound. What keeps him talking? In evaluating Bob Lazar's extraordinary claims, the available evidence exists in a frustrating gray area, neither conclusively proving his story nor allowing for its easy dismissal. The documentation he and his supporters have presented is limited but intriguing. Most notably, there is a W-2 tax form from 1989 issued by the Department of Naval Intelligence, showing earnings in the low 5 figures for a short period. While skeptics argue this could be for any number of contractor jobs, supporters contend its source aligns with his claim of working for a branch of the military intelligence community on a compartmentalized project. It is a tangible, if ambiguous, paper link to the secretive world he describes. Witness testimony forms another pillar. Journalist George Knapp has spoken with individuals in the Las Vegas and scientific community who claim to have known Lazar before his public emergence and confirm he spoke of working at a secret site on advanced propulsion well before the 1989 broadcast. Others have vaguely corroborated elements of his employment history in the defense contractor world. However, no individual has come forward to publicly state, "I worked with Bob at S4." The supporting testimonies are peripheral, adding circumstantial weight, but not direct confirmation. In terms of physical evidence from the crafts themselves, there is none that Lazar has produced or that is publicly accessible. This is the most significant evidential gap and the strongest point for skeptics. He did not smuggle out a piece of the sport model's hull or a chip from its reactor. The evidence, instead, is experiential and observational. He and Knapp filmed what they claim were the Wednesday night test flights from a vantage point on Highway 375. The resulting footage shows distant lights performing unusual, silent maneuvers. While compelling to viewers and consistent with his description, the footage is not definitive proof of extraterrestrial technology. It shows anomalous lights, not a structured craft. It is evidence of something unusual happening in the claimed location, but not of its origin. Perhaps the most puzzling category of evidence is Lazar's demonstrated technical knowledge. In early interviews and in later discussions, he has articulated complex concepts about gravity propulsion, reactor physics, and element stability that were far outside the public discourse in 1989. He drew diagrams of the craft's interior and reactor core with a confident, technical specificity. Critics say a smart person could have researched fringe science, but supporters ask, how did he so accurately describe the behavior of a gravity propulsion system? The wobble on startup, the silent acceleration, the focused gravity field, years before such concepts entered popular science? His knowledge, whether acquired firsthand or from deep study, aligns eerily with the theoretical predictions of how such a system would operate. The totality is a mosaic of hints and gaps. There is no single, irrefutable smoking gun piece of evidence that would compel scientific acceptance. Instead, there is a collection of puzzling data points, a government paycheck from an intelligence branch, witness accounts of pre-broadcast knowledge, anomalous footage from the claimed test site, and a detailed technical narrative that predicted scientific developments. Each piece can be individually questioned or explained away, but together they form a pattern that resists simple dismissal. The evidence is undeniably limited and circumstantial, failing to meet the burden of proof for an extraordinary claim. But what does exist, from the W2 to the specific physics descriptions, is consistently puzzling, creating a persistent anomaly in the record that invites more questions than it answers. The most substantial and legitimate arguments against Bob Lazar's claims center on the question of his personal credibility. Skeptics, including professional debunkers and mainstream scientists, have built a case that his story collapses under the weight of its own unverifiable foundations. Their critique begins with the most damaging fact, the absence of educational records. Lazar claimed advanced degrees from MIT and Caltech, two of the world's most prestigious and meticulously documented institutions. Both have consistently stated they have no record of him as a student. For many, this is a disqualifying red flag. In the world of science and academia, credentials are the currency of credibility. Their absence suggests either a deliberate fabrication by Lazar or a profound error on his part, both of which critically undermine his status as a physicist qualified to work on a project of this magnitude. Critics also point to inconsistencies in his narrative over time. While the core story has remained stable, skeptics highlight minor variations in details: the exact number of craft at S4, specific dates, the nature of his security clearance process, as signs of a story that is not based on fixed, lived experience, but is being recalled or adjusted. They argue that a true, traumatic, world-shaking memory would be more consistently etched, not subject to slight shifts. Furthermore, they scrutinize his personal life, noting past legal issues and his ownership of United Nuclear, a company that sells scientific materials. They frame this not as entrepreneurial success, but as a potential motive, suggesting he crafted an elaborate story to bring notoriety and customers to his business ventures. From a scientific standpoint, the rejection is nearly universal among mainstream physicists. The reason is rooted in a fundamental principle known as the burden of proof, and Carl Sagan's famous adage that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Lazar's claims are as extraordinary as they come. The possession of functional alien spacecraft, gravity control, and stable super-heavy elements. The evidence he presents, a personal story, it W2, and some light footage, is considered anecdotal and circumstantial, falling vastly short of the extraordinary standard. Scientists require reproducible, peer-reviewed data, physical samples, or independently verifiable documentation. Lazar's account provides none of these. Therefore, from the rigorous perspective of the scientific method, his claims are not even wrong. They are simply outside the realm of testable science and are dismissed as such. The skepticism is also fueled by the historical context of UFO lore. The field is littered with charismatic figures who have made detailed, compelling claims that later unraveled or were proven fraudulent. To a skeptic, Lazar fits a pattern. The lone whistleblower with a fantastic tale, disputed credentials, and a small group of ardent believers. The government's denial and the erasure of records are seen not as evidence of a cover-up, but as the predictable outcome of challenging a fantasist's inflated resume. The entire saga is viewed through the lens of Occam's razor, which is simpler. That a man fabricated parts of his background and told a tall tale for complex personal reasons, or that the U.S. government possesses multiple alien spacecraft, and he alone broke the secrecy. To the skeptical mind, the former is overwhelmingly more plausible. However, a thorough critique must also account for the aspects that simple dismissal doesn't easily explain. It doesn't address why a supposed fabulist would choose such a risky, specific, and technically dense narrative instead of a simpler UFO sighting story. It doesn't fully account for the W2 from naval intelligence, a detail that, if fabricated, would be legally perilous. It struggles with the element 115 coincidence, a precise number that later appeared on the periodic table. And it doesn't grapple with the consistency and depth of his technical descriptions, which have intrigued even some fringe physicists. While the skeptical arguments are strong, methodical, and grounded in a demand for verifiable proof, they primarily deconstruct Lazar's credibility and point out the lack of physical evidence. They successfully show that his story fails to meet the high standard of proof it demands. But a lingering question remains for the open-minded observer. Do these strong arguments, focused on his person and the absence of proof, adequately explain every puzzling detail of the story? Or do they leave certain enigmatic pieces still sitting on the table, waiting for a better explanation? For those who find credibility in Bob Lazar's story, the argument is built not on a single piece of irrefutable evidence, but on a compelling tapestry of details, consistencies, and puzzling corroborations that together seem too specific to be the product of invention. The most steadfast pillar of support has been investigative journalist George Knapp. Knapp did not simply report Lazar's claims. He investigated them for months before the initial broadcast, vetting his background as best he could within the constraints of secrecy. He has stood by Lazar for over 3 decades, citing the pre-interview corroboration from associates and the profound conviction he sensed in the man. Knapp's own reputation as a serious journalist, not a sensationalist, lends significant weight to his continued advocacy. He frames the story not as absolute proof of aliens, but as a credible account from a whistleblower that deserves serious investigation, not dismissal. Beyond Knapp, Other witnesses have provided fragments of corroboration. Individuals in the Las Vegas area and within the broader defense contractor community have anonymously confirmed to researchers that Lazar did speak of working on secret propulsion projects before he went public. More intriguingly, some former employees of Area 51's support operations have hinted at knowledge of a site matching the description of S-4, though never confirming Lazar's presence. While no smoking gun colleague has emerged, this peripheral testimony suggests Lazar was moving in circles where such stories, true or not, were part of the hidden landscape, and that his claims did not emerge from a vacuum. The scientific coincidences form the most objective part of the supporters' case. The prediction of element 115 is paramount. Lazar didn't vaguely reference a heavy element. He gave a precise atomic number in 1989 that was pure speculation. Its eventual synthesis, while not of a stable isotope, transformed this detail from a mark of a fraud guessing a sci-fi number into a staggering coincidence at minimum. Supporters argue it's statistically improbable and point to it as potential back-engineered proof, information that leaked out from a classified program aware of the element's significance years before public science caught up. Furthermore, the technical minutiae of Lazar's descriptions have, over time, aligned with emerging theories in advanced physics. His explanation of gravity amplification and the craft's ability to warp space-time predates the popularization of the Alcubierre warp drive concept in the 1990s. His description of the craft's startup, wobble, as the gravity amplifiers sink, is a specific engineering detail that matches theoretical models of stabilizing such a field. The lack of heat signature and sonic boom aligns perfectly with a propulsion system that doesn't interact with the atmosphere, but with spacetime itself. Supporters contend that a hoaxer in 1989 would not have had access to these nuanced, theoretical concepts, which were confined to obscure physics papers. The unwavering consistency of his account over more than 30 years is repeatedly cited. Under intense pressure, through countless interviews, and facing relentless hostility, the architecture of his story, the location, the craft's design, the propulsion method, the test schedule, has never changed. He has not added sensational new elements to keep the story alive. This steadfastness is interpreted as the mark of someone recounting a fixed, powerful memory, not maintaining a complex lie. Inconsistencies, where they exist, are argued to be the result of minor memory lapses about peripheral details, not the core experience. Finally, supporters turn the skeptic's strongest weapon, the erased records, into a point for their own case. They argue that the thoroughness of the discrediting campaign is itself evidence. If Lazar were a nobody telling a lie, he would be ignored, not systematically scrubbed from databases and harassed. The intensity of the response suggests he touched a live wire. The fact that his W-2 exists, showing payment from naval intelligence, while his educational records vanish, creates a telling asymmetry. Evidence linking him to secrecy is preserved, the paycheck, while evidence establishing his public identity, his degrees, is obscured. This pattern, they say, is exactly what a security apparatus would do to discredit a genuine whistleblower, attack his foundational credibility while leaving a breadcrumb that hints at the truth for those who look closely. Those who believe point to this constellation of details, the precise prediction, the consistent technical narrative, the paradoxical evidence trail, and the disproportionate backlash, and argue they are too specific, too interlocking, and too strangely validated by time to be the work of a simple fabricator. The story of Bob Lazar achieved a powerful second life and reached a global, mainstream audience through the medium of documentary film. While the 1989 Klaus broadcast was the genesis, it was the 2018 documentary, Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, directed by filmmaker Jeremy Corbell, that reanimated the narrative for the digital age. Corbell's approach was intimate and persistent. He gained unprecedented access to Lazar over several years, filming him not as a distant talking head, but in his daily life, at his workplace United Nuclear, and in reflective moments. The documentary presented Lazar as a relatable, albeit weary, figure, a man living with the consequences of his past rather than profiting from it. This humanizing lens was pivotal. It allowed a new generation to see past the caricature of a UFO guy and engage with the person behind the story. A catalytic moment occurred when Lazar sat for a lengthy, detailed interview on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast in 2019. Rogan's platform, with its millions of listeners, provided a sprawling, conversational space where Lazar could tell his story without time constraints or hostile interrogation. Rogan's genuine curiosity and his audience's openness to controversial topics created a perfect storm. The episode became one of the podcast's most downloaded, introducing Lazar's account to millions who had never seen the old news footage. The interview wasn't about proving the story to scientists, but about presenting it to the public courtroom, and the verdict from a significant portion of that public was fascinated belief. It demonstrated that the story, 30 years old, still had the power to captivate and convince. This modern rediscovery was fueled by a changing media landscape. Younger audiences, skeptical of traditional institutions and steeped in internet research culture, found Lazar's tale of government secrecy and suppressed technology resonant. They approached it not with the automatic dismissal of older media gatekeepers, but with a digital native's willingness to dissect the evidence themselves, to examine the W2, analyze the test flight footage frame by frame, and debate the physics on forums. The story thrived in this ecosystem of direct engagement and peer-to-peer investigation, finding fertile ground in an era of widespread institutional distrust. Jeremy Corbell's role evolved from documentarian to active investigator. He took up the mantle from George Knapp, using modern techniques to probe the story's lingering questions. He tracked down and interviewed other potential witnesses, like a man claiming to be a former security guard at the site. He presented new evidence, such as an audio recording of a mysterious, oscillating sound allegedly recorded near Area 51, which he linked to Lazar's description of the craft's propulsion hum. While these new elements are also debated, Corbell's work succeeded in keeping the investigation alive, framing it as an ongoing mystery rather than a closed case from the Cold War. This new generation's perspective is less about absolute proof of extraterrestrials and more about the implications of the story itself. They ask, what does it say about power, secrecy, and scientific freedom? If true, it's a cosmic revolution. If false, it's a fascinating case study in the creation of a modern myth, the psychology of belief, and the lengths to which institutions will go to manage inconvenient narratives. The story serves as a template for broader conversations about transparency and the control of transformative technology. The enduring power of the narrative, therefore, lies in its unique alloy of ingredients. It combines the personal drama of a whistleblower with the tantalizing specifics of hard science fiction. It is rooted in a real, mysterious place, Area 51, and involves a tangible, described object, the sport model. It offers just enough circumstantial evidence. The W2, the footage, the element 115 coincidence, to be intriguing, but not enough to be conclusive, which paradoxically sustains the debate. It is a story that can be a mirror, reflecting what the viewer brings to it. A skeptic sees a hoax. A believer sees validation. A philosopher sees a parable about truth and power. Decades after a shadowy figure first spoke on local Las Vegas television, the story not only persists but flourishes in podcasts, documentaries, and online debates. It refuses to die, not because it has been proven, but because it has never been fully explained away, and because at its core, it asks a question that remains perpetually compelling. In the vast silence of the universe, what astonishing secrets might we already be holding? and who gets to decide if we ever know about them. The legend of Area 51 is a sprawling, multi-layered narrative, and the sport model, as compelling as it is, represents just one facet of this complex gem. Over the decades, other individuals have come forward with their own accounts, painting a picture of a facility engaged in activities that blur the line between extraordinary human achievement and something truly otherworldly. These other whistleblowers and witnesses speak of a variety of anomalous experiences, from seeing disc-shaped crafts of different sizes and configurations to working on projects involving exotic materials and propulsion concepts that defied their understanding. Their stories, while less detailed or publicized than Lazar's, contribute to the persistent rumor that the base's hangars contain more than one type of enigma. It is crucial to acknowledge the confirmed, reality-altering work that has undeniably taken place at Groom Lake. This is where the legendary U-2 and State Route 71 Blackbird spy planes were developed and tested, aircraft that were themselves so advanced they were often mistaken for UFOs by commercial pilots. The F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter, a flying collection of sharp angles that seemed to defy radar, was also born here. These programs were shrouded in absolute secrecy for national security reasons, and their existence proves that Area 51's primary, historical function has been as a cradle for revolutionary human aerospace technology. The secrecy around them was immense, justified, and successful. This creates a fascinating dynamic. The confirmed secrets are astonishing enough. The existence of these programs demonstrates the government's capability and willingness to conduct decades-long, billion-dollar projects in total obscurity, projects that would seem like science fiction until they were unveiled. This proven history of radical innovation and extreme secrecy provides the perfect camouflage and the plausible foundation for even more radical possibilities. It means that when someone speaks of silent, disc-shaped craft at Area 51, the response cannot simply be, "The government couldn't keep that secret." We know they can, and they have, for projects that changed global politics and warfare. Thus, the line between fact and fiction at Area 51 is inherently, intentionally blurred. The confirmed black projects provide the smoke, behind which other, even darker projects could theoretically exist. Witnesses may see a next-generation, classified drone with unconventional propulsion and interpret it as extraterrestrial. Conversely, they may see something genuinely inexplicable that is casually dismissed as just another black project. The culture of the base ensures that no employee has the full picture, making it impossible for any single whistleblower to present a complete case. The sport model story exists within this ecosystem of deliberate ambiguity. It is one specific, detailed claim set against a backdrop of other rumors, proven secrets, and the government's consistent policy of neither confirming nor denying anything about the base. This environment makes definitive conclusions impossible, but it also makes the pursuit of the broader truth endlessly compelling. The sport model, whether artifact or myth, is just one intricate piece of a much larger and more puzzling mosaic, where every confirmed secret makes the alleged one seem just a little more possible. The immense secrecy surrounding places like Area 51 and its alleged Annex S4 is not an arbitrary choice. It is a meticulously engineered ecosystem. Its primary justification is, and has always been, national security. In a world of geopolitical rivals, a technological leap of even a few years can determine the balance of power. The development of the U-2 and stealth technology provided intelligence and tactical advantages that were deemed worth any cost in transparency. When dealing with potentially world-altering technology, whether human-made or otherwise, the instinct to control and weaponize it, or to prevent adversaries from acquiring it, becomes an overwhelming imperative. Secrecy is the lock on the toolbox of strategic advantage. This security is operationalized through a system called compartmentalization. Information is not just classified, it is shattered into thousands of isolated fragments. Each person working on a project is granted access only to the specific slice of information they need to perform their discrete task. An engineer might work on a cooling system without knowing what it cools. A materials specialist might analyze a sample without knowing where it came from. This creates a workforce of experts who are also profound ignoramuses regarding the overall project. The system is designed so that no single person, not even most project managers, can walk away with the complete blueprint of the secret. It turns human knowledge into a puzzle where each person holds one piece, and only a very few at the top have the picture on the box. Operations run on a strict need-to-know basis. Curiosity is not just discouraged, it is a security risk. Asking questions outside one's purview can lead to revoked clearance, reassignment, or dismissal. This culture fosters a specific psychological environment, one of professional silence and purposeful ignorance. Conversations are functional, not exploratory. Social bonds are weakened by the unspoken barriers of classified knowledge. The workplace becomes a collection of isolated islands, connected only by the narrow, official bridges of task-related communication. Historically, the U.S. government has proven capable of maintaining monumental secrets for decades. The Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bomb, employed over 130,000 people, yet remained largely hidden from public and enemy view until the first detonation. This precedent is critical. It demonstrates that large, complex, world-changing scientific endeavors can be conducted in complete secrecy within a democratic society, provided the justification is compelling enough and the compartmentalization is absolute. The secrecy around Area 51's confirmed projects follows this exact blueprint, proving the mechanism is still operational. The psychological impact on those within this system is significant. They carry a cognitive dissonance, holding earth-shattering knowledge that they can never discuss, not even with family. This can lead to a sense of isolation, a burden of silent witness. For some, it fosters a deep sense of patriotic duty. For others, it may create a moral tension, especially if they believe the secret technology could benefit humanity if released. This internal conflict is the human cost of such secrecy, and it is the pressure point from which whistleblowers like Lazar eventually emerge. Why do some secrets last for decades, or potentially forever? The ecosystem is self-reinforcing. The initial secret creates a bureaucracy to protect it. That bureaucracy develops its own institutional inertia and vested interest in maintaining the secret status quo. As years pass, admitting the truth would mean admitting to decades of deception, facing legal and political repercussions, and destabilizing public trust. The secret evolves from a tactical advantage into a historical liability that becomes increasingly difficult to safely disclose. The longer it is held, the heavier it becomes, and the more reason there is to keep holding it. In this carefully constructed world of shadows, where knowledge is parsed out in eyedroppers and curiosity is a cardinal sin, truth transforms from a simple fact into a controlled substance, a potential weapon whose release is managed not by its inherent value, but by a cold calculus of risk and control. While Bob Lazar's account is the most detailed and well-known, he does not stand alone in claiming insider knowledge of extraordinary activities tied to Area 51. A mosaic of other testimonies exists, creating patterns that both support and complicate the overall mystery. These accounts come from individuals with varied backgrounds, scientists, security personnel, military officials, and though their stories are distinct, they often echo similar, haunting themes. Their existence suggests that if there is a core truth to the legend, it has brushed against multiple people across different times and roles, each leaving with a fragment of the puzzle. One of the more controversial figures is Dan Burish, who claims to have worked as a microbiologist at a secret site near Area 51 in the 1990s. His story diverges significantly from Lazar's in focus, but shares the setting of extreme secrecy. Burish alleges he was involved in the medical study and care of an extraterrestrial being, an entity he referred to as an EB, extraterrestrial biological entity. He describes interactions with this being and involvement in projects with far-reaching implications. His claims, even more medically and biologically oriented than Lazar's engineering focus, have been met with intense skepticism and are often cited as an example of the mythology expanding into new, sensational domains. Yet, his narrative reinforces the idea of a multidisciplinary, deeply hidden program. Beyond named whistleblowers, there are accounts from individuals who prefer to remain anonymous or are known only by pseudonyms. Some claim to have been security personnel at perimeter installations, reporting sightings of disc-shaped craft being moved at night under heavy guard, or describing the intimidating presence of unmarked black helicopters that enforced a silence they dared not break. Others allege they worked in logistical or support roles for private contractors at the base, never seeing a craft directly, but hearing persistent, hushed rumors from colleagues about the sports model or the museum piece, slang that aligns eerily with Lazar's terminology. These secondary accounts add a layer of circumstantial texture, suggesting Lazar's story did not emerge in a vacuum, but resonated within a hidden subculture. The phenomenon also extends beyond the fence line. Military pilots, both active and retired, have occasionally spoken about encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena during training exercises in the vast Nevada test and training range that encompasses Area 51. These objects are described as performing maneuvers that dwarf the capabilities of known aircraft: instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic speeds without sonic booms, and right-angle turns. While these accounts rarely mention a specific base or program, the location of these repeated encounters in restricted airspace adjacent to the world's most secretive base is a detail that invites connection. Commercial airline pilots flying over the Southwest have also reported unusual sightings for decades. Historically, some of these were the high-altitude U-2, mistaken for a mysterious, stationary silver object. But modern reports continue, often describing lights that behave in ways that defy conventional explanation. Pilots are trained observers, and their reports carry weight due to their expertise and the potential safety implications. While they don't claim knowledge of S4, their consistent testimonies from the skies above and around the area contribute to the enduring aura of the unknown that cloaks the region. Examining these varied accounts reveals common elements: the setting of extreme secrecy, the presence of disc-shaped or unconventional craft, and a technology that defies known physics through silent operation and impossible maneuvers. The discrepancies, however, are just as telling. Some speak of multiple craft types, others of biological entities. Some describe a cold, scientific atmosphere, others a sense of mystical encounter. These differences can be interpreted in two ways: as evidence of a sprawling, multifaceted reality with different witnesses accessing different parts of it, or as the natural divergence that occurs when separate individuals embroider a core cultural myth with their own imaginations and experiences. The collective weight of these stories, from the detailed insider claims of Lazar and Burish to the anonymous whispers and pilot sightings, creates a persistent background hum to the official silence. It suggests that the curiosity about Area 51 is not fueled by one man's story alone, but by a slow leak of experiences from the pressure cooker of secrecy over many years. The details shift, the perspectives change, but the central location and the sense of profound, hidden revelation remain constant. Different people, from different walks of life and different decades, have stepped forward or whispered accounts that, despite their variations, tell similar stories of encountering the utterly inexplicable in the shadow of a remote desert base. In the summer of 2019, the decades-old mystery of Area 51 collided head-on with the anarchic, meme-driven spirit of the internet, resulting in a cultural moment that was equal parts absurdity and revelation. It began simply, a Facebook event created by a college student as a joke. The premise was audacious and playful. "They can't stop all of us," it declared, inviting people to meet at the Area 51 border on September 20th to see them aliens. The event was titled Storm Area 51, They Can't Stop All of Us. What happened next was a viral explosion. Within weeks, over 2 million people clicked going, and another 1.5 million clicked interested. The joke had tapped into a deep, widespread, and largely benign fascination with the base, transforming esoteric conspiracy theory into a global, participatory meme. The phenomenon captured the public imagination because it perfectly blended humor with genuine curiosity. Memes proliferated across social media. People photoshopped themselves Naruto running, a reference to the event's silly suggested tactic to dodge bullets. Pass guards created mock-up posters and shared iconic clips from UFO documentaries. The tone was irreverent, but the subject was real. It demonstrated that Area 51 had fully transcended its origins as a classified location to become a potent pop culture icon, a symbol of government secrecy, alien speculation, and the human desire to peek behind the curtain. The raid was never a serious plan. It was a collective wink, a way for millions to say, "We see this place, we're curious about it, and we're going to laugh about it together." As the date approached, the joke took on a life of its own. The tiny town of Rachel, Nevada, population under 100, found itself at the epicenter of a potential invasion of internet tourists. Entrepreneurs organized alien stock festivals. The U.S. military and local law enforcement issued stern warnings, stating that the base was a live training range and that any attempt to trespass would be met with force. The Air Force, in a rare public statement about the base, explicitly warned against trying to enter the restricted area. The government's serious response to what was born as a joke underscored the enduring, non-negotiable reality of the security surrounding the place. On September 20th, 2019, the actual event was a bizarre and peaceful anticlimax. A few thousand curiosity seekers and festival goers descended on the area around Rachel and the Alien Research Center in Hiko. They wore alien antennae, posed for pictures with extraterrestrial highway signs, and celebrated with music and talks. A handful of individuals attempted to approach the gate. They were peacefully detained by sheriff's deputies, given citations, and released. There was no storming, no confrontation, no great revelation. The raid was a party at the world's most mysterious doorstep. What the phenomenon revealed was profound. It showed that the public's fascination with Area 51 is not confined to a niche community of UFO believers. It is a mainstream curiosity, a shared cultural reference point. The event acted as a pressure valve, allowing people to engage with the mystery in a safe, communal, and humorous way. It demonstrated that the desire to know what's hidden at Groom Lake is pervasive, but that desire is tempered by an understanding of the real-world boundaries and a general respect for the law. The humor was the vehicle, but the destination was a collective acknowledgement of a long-standing mystery. Beneath the layers of memes and Naruto-run jokes lay a genuine, enduring curiosity. The event succeeded in making the government break its traditional silence, however briefly, to acknowledge the public's focus. It proved that the legend of Area 51 is self-sustaining, capable of regenerating interest for new generations who discover it not through dusty government documents, but through viral internet jokes. The blend of humor and curiosity was perfect for the digital age. It allowed people to engage without commitment, to speculate without risk, and to be part of a global inside joke about one of the world's most serious secrets. Millions joked with friends online about raiding the base to see them aliens, participating in a shared cultural moment. But beneath the laughter and the clever memes pulsed a real, persistent, and deeply human question. What incredible truths, what astounding technologies or profound secrets are actually worth guarding with such terrifying seriousness in the middle of that empty desert? For decades, the U.S. government's official stance regarding Area 51 and the claims emerging from it was a monolithic wall of denial and silence. In response to specific inquiries about Bob Lazar's employment following his 1989 revelations, the U.S. Air Force, the branch historically linked to the base, stated unequivocally that they had no record of a Robert Lazar ever being employed in the capacity he described. The Department of Energy, under whose auspices much of the Nevada test site operates, echoed similar denials regarding his alleged work at a site called S4. These were not nuanced rebuttals of his technical claims. They were categorical denials of his very presence in their secretive world, an attempt to sever the man from the story at its root. More broadly, the government's official position on Area 51 itself was one of strategic non-existence. For over half a century, it was the place that wasn't there. It did not appear on public maps. Government officials would not acknowledge its existence in interviews or congressional testimony. The airspace above it was simply restricted, its purpose classified. This created a surreal duality. A facility visible in satellite imagery, known to every aviation chart, and the subject of global fascination, was simultaneously an official phantom in the eyes of the state that operated it. This policy of neither confirm nor deny extended to all questions about activities at Groom Lake, creating a vacuum of official truth that was eagerly filled by speculation and legend. This careful language was a masterclass in bureaucratic obfuscation. Officials would speak of sensitive research, test ranges, and national security imperatives without ever attaching those terms to the specific location, Area 51. The goal was to provide just enough plausible, generic cover to satisfy a superficial inquiry without conceding an inch of actual ground. They would admit that advanced aircraft testing occurred, but never where. They would deny specific, sensational claims, like alien spacecraft, while refusing to comment on the facility those claims were about. It was a dance of deflection that maintained the veil. The dam of absolute denial finally cracked, not with a bang, but with a quiet declassification footnote. In 2013, in response to a Freedom of Information Act request, the CIA publicly acknowledged the existence of Area 51 for the first time, releasing historical documents that detailed its role in the U-2 and Oxguard, State Route 71 programs. This acknowledgement was carefully framed as a historical revelation about Cold War spy planes, not an admission about current activities or anything more exotic. The base was finally real, but only as a museum piece of the past, its present and future still shrouded in the same old silence. This historical acknowledgement was significant, yet it maintained the core strategy. They admitted the place to inoculate against further inquiry into its purpose. By confirming what had long been an open secret, the base's existence and its role in legendary spy planes, they hoped to drain some of the mystery, to suggest that the entire legend was just about remarkable human technology. For claims like Lazar's, the official record remained unchanged. Denials of his employment, silence on S4, and a new, sanitized historical narrative for Area 51 that explained everything and nothing at the same time. For years, they had denied everything about the base, dismissing witnesses and their stories as fabrications about a non-existent place. Then, in 2013, they couldn't deny the place anymore. But in acknowledging the ground, they implicitly asked the world to believe that the only secrets it ever held were the ones they had just decided to tell us about. This historical acknowledgement was significant, yet it maintained the core strategy. They admitted the place to inoculate against further inquiry into its purpose. By confirming what had long been an open secret, the base's existence and its role in legendary spy planes, they hoped to drain some of the mystery, to suggest that the entire legend was just about remarkable human technology. For claims like Lazar's, the official record remained unchanged. Denials of his employment, silence on S4, and a new, sanitized historical narrative for Area 51 that explained everything and nothing at the same time. For years, they had denied everything about the base, dismissing witnesses and their stories as fabrications about a non-existent place. Then, in 2013, they couldn't deny the place anymore. But in acknowledging the ground, they implicitly asked the world to believe that the only secrets it ever held were the ones they had just decided to tell us about. In December 2017, the landscape of the UFO conversation shifted seismically and forever. The New York Times published a front-page expose revealing the existence of a secret Pentagon program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ADIP. This was not a leak from a fringe whistleblower. It was a sanctioned revelation involving official documents, named government officials, and stunning corroborative evidence. For the first time, the U.S. government admitted, through the world's most prestigious newspaper, that it had been formally and seriously investigating unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, the new, less loaded term for UFOs, since at least 2007, with a budget of $22 million. The core mandate of ADIP was to investigate and gain understanding of aerial threats that displayed advanced capabilities beyond known human technology. The evidence presented was even more startling than the program's existence. The Times article was accompanied by 3 declassified U.S. Navy videos, FLIR, Gimbal, and Go Fast. These were not blurry dots on a handheld camera. They were targeting system recordings from advanced F/A-18 Super Hornet fighter jets, showing objects with no visible wings or propulsion, performing maneuvers that defied physics. The Tic Tac video, in particular, showed a smooth, white object off the coast of San Diego in 2004. According to the pilots, it accelerated instantaneously and vanished from sophisticated radar systems, a performance that Rear Admiral Ret. Tim Gallaudet later called a strategic surprise. The testimony of the pilots gave the videos devastating credibility. Commander David Fravor, a highly decorated naval aviator with 18 years of experience, described the 2004 encounter in detail. He and his wingmen were vectored to investigate anomalous radar returns. They visually observed a white, tic-tac-shaped object about 40 feet long, hovering erratically above the ocean. As Fravor's jet descended toward it, the object accelerated away with a speed and agility he described as astounding, disappearing in less than a second. It then reappeared on radar 60 miles away almost instantly, a feat implying velocities thousands of miles per hour. Fravor stated unequivocally, "It was a real object, it exists, and I saw it." His account, backed by sensor data and 3 other crew members, presented a tangible, unexplainable encounter with a technology that operated outside known parameters. This official acknowledgement changed the conversation in fundamental ways. It moved the topic from the fringe to the forefront of national security and defense policy. No longer could the entire subject be dismissed as the domain of conspiracy theorists. The Pentagon itself was now the source, confirming that something unexplained and highly advanced was operating in restricted U.S. airspace with impunity. The question was no longer, do UFOs exist, but what are they, who made them, and what is their intent? The government shifted from blanket denial to a posture of concerned investigation. For stories like Bob Lazar's, the ADIP revelation acted as a powerful, if indirect, validator. While it did not corroborate his specific claims about S4 or the sport model, it shattered the foundational premise used to dismiss him for decades, that the government had no interest in or knowledge of such phenomena. It proved that the U.S. military takes reports of advanced, physics-defying craft seriously enough to fund multi-million-dollar classified programs. The behavior of the objects in the Navy videos, silent operation, instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic travel without sonic booms, eerily echoed the descriptions Lazar gave of the sport model's test flights 30 years prior. The government was now admitting to investigating the very type of technology he claimed to have worked on. After decades of flat denials and public ridicule aimed at witnesses, the Pentagon, through the revelation of its own secret program and the release of jaw-dropping evidence, had finally admitted they were not just aware of these mysteries, but actively, urgently investigating them. The government's shift from blanket denial to guarded acknowledgement of UAPs is not a straightforward path to disclosure, but a navigation of profound strategic and ethical dilemmas. For the intelligence and defense communities, the question of what to tell the public is secondary to a more urgent calculation. What are the national security risks of revealing anything? If these phenomena represent advanced technology of terrestrial origin from a strategic rival, then disclosure risks revealing what capabilities we can track, what we cannot, and the gaps in our defenses. Admitting vulnerability is something intelligence agencies are structurally designed to avoid. If the technology is non-human, the calculus becomes even more complex, involving unknowns about intent and capability that defy traditional risk assessment. A primary concern is the inadvertent revelation of sources and methods. How the government detects, tracks, and analyzes UAPs involves some of its most sensitive intelligence-gathering capabilities: satellite networks, advanced radar systems, signal intelligence, and perhaps technologies the public cannot imagine. To discuss the what of UAPs in detail might inevitably reveal the how of U.S. intelligence collection, providing a blueprint to adversaries on how to evade detection not just for UAPs, but for their own conventional and stealth platforms. Secrecy, in this light, is not about hiding aliens, but about protecting the crown jewels of national technical means. The specter of public panic, often cited in science fiction, is a real consideration, albeit perhaps an overestimated one. Historical precedents, like Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast, suggest the potential for societal disruption. Intelligence analysts might model scenarios. How would financial markets, religious institutions, or international relations react to definitive proof of a non-human intelligence with technology far surpassing our own? Would it cause unity or chaos? The fear is not of mass hysteria in the streets, but of a more subtle destabilization, a crisis of confidence in institutions, scientific paradigms, and humanity's place in the cosmos that could have unpredictable geopolitical consequences. Internationally, disclosure is a minefield. If the U.S. possesses recovered exotic materials or craft, as some whistleblowers allege, admitting this would trigger immense diplomatic pressure from allies and rivals alike to share technology and intelligence. It could be seen as a declaration of a new, unilateral strategic advantage, potentially destabilizing arms control frameworks and alliances. Conversely, if the U.S. is perceived as being visited by unknown actors it cannot control, it could project an image of vulnerability, weakening its global standing. The international implications force a slow, coordinated, and ultra-cautious approach. This explains the current slow-drip strategy of information release. Rather than a single, shocking announcement, we see a controlled sequence: the acknowledgement of a program, ADIP, the release of declassified videos, the establishment of a new office, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, and public congressional hearings. This method serves multiple purposes. It acclimates the public and the media gradually, reducing the shock factor. It allows the government to gauge reaction and adjust its messaging. It also pressures other nations, and perhaps even private entities, to come forward with their own information, helping to build a more complete picture without the U.S. having to reveal everything it knows first. Given these overlapping and monumental concerns, the idea of full transparency is likely a fantasy. The intelligence community's duty, as it sees it, is to protect the nation, not to satisfy public curiosity. Some truths may be considered too inherently destabilizing to global order, to technological monopoly, to fundamental human psychology, to ever be fully revealed. The public may receive conclusions, "We have determined this is not a threat," or "This remains unexplained," without ever receiving the underlying data that led to them. Information will be released on a need-to-know basis, and the public's need to know will always be weighed against a daunting array of security risks. The dilemma is eternal. How does a government manage the possession of potentially world-shattering knowledge within a democratic system that values transparency? The answer, it seems, is with extreme caution, parsing out truths only when the risk of holding them secret begins to outweigh the perceived risk of their release. Some truths, by their very nature, may be too destabilizing to the established order to ever be revealed all at once. The most dramatic escalation in the official UAP narrative occurred in the summer of 2023, when the topic moved from Pentagon briefings to the bright lights of a congressional hearing room. On July 26, the House Oversight Committee's Subcommittee on National Security convened a public hearing featuring 3 whistleblowers, most notably David Grush, a former high-ranking intelligence official. This was not a session about fuzzy lights. It was a formal, bipartisan investigation into allegations of illegal secrecy and potentially world-altering government programs. The conversation had evolved from "Do UAPs exist?" to "What is the government hiding about them and why?" David Grush's testimony was the centerpiece. A former Air Force intelligence officer and veteran of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office, Grush claimed that during his duties on the UAP task force, he was informed of a decades-long crash retrieval and reverse engineering program for non-human craft. He alleged that the U.S. government is in possession of both intact and partially intact vehicles of non-human origin, and that it has also recovered non-human biologics from crash sites. Crucially, he stated that this program had been illegally shielded from congressional oversight, funded by misappropriated money, and that he faced retaliation for his inquiries. His claims, made under oath, represented the most specific and damning allegations ever presented in an official government forum. The hearing revealed a remarkable bipartisan interest, a rarity in modern Washington. Republicans and Democrats alike asked serious, probing questions, expressing frustration with Pentagon's stonewalling and emphasizing the need for transparency and proper oversight. This unified front signaled that UAPs were no longer a fringe issue, but a legitimate government accountability and national security matter. The representatives were not debating if objects were in the sky. They were investigating a potential conspiracy within the government to hide their nature and origin from the American people and their elected officials. Yet, for all the bombshell allegations, the hearing also highlighted what hasn't been revealed. Grush's claims were based on classified testimony he had already provided to the Intelligence Community Inspector General and in closed-door sessions with Congress. He could not provide names, locations, or documents in the public setting. The Pentagon's representatives, while acknowledging the need to investigate intrusions in restricted airspace, provided no confirmation of Grush's specific allegations. The public was left with a stark dichotomy: sworn, credible testimony of a monumental secret and the official Department of Defense position that no such program exists. The truth remained in the classified chamber. This shifting official narrative is significant. We have moved from total denial, pre-2017, to admitting investigation (ADIP), to now entertaining, in the halls of Congress, allegations of a hidden crash retrieval program. The goalposts of respectable discussion have been moved dramatically. While the government has not confirmed Lazar's or Grush's stories, it has created a framework where such stories are no longer automatically laughable. They are the subject of legislation, whistleblower protections, and serious media investigation. Within this new context, Bob Lazar's 1989 account finds a haunting resonance. The core of his story, a reverse engineering program on non-human craft at a secret Nevada base, is precisely what David Grush alleged under oath 34 years later. Lazar described the sport model. Grush speaks of intact and partially intact vehicles. Lazar spoke of briefings on extraterrestrial biological entities. Grush mentioned non-human biologics. The parallels are undeniable, separated by a generation but connected by a common blueprint of alleged secrecy. Lazar's story now appears less as an isolated, bizarre tale and more as a precursor, a first draft of allegations that have now reached the highest levels of government scrutiny. The 2023 hearings did not provide final answers, but they irrevocably changed the game. They demonstrated that credible insiders are willing to risk their careers to allege a cover-up of historic proportions. They showed that Congress is taking the matter seriously enough to defy partisan divides. The conversation has moved from the desert perimeter of Area 51 to the heart of American power in Washington, D.C. The enduring question, once whispered in UFO circles and now asked in congressional chambers, is whether this sustained pressure, these credible whistleblowers, and this unprecedented official attention are finally guiding us, however slowly and painfully, toward a long-buried truth about our world and our place in it. If the story of the sport model is grounded in truth, its implications extend far beyond a single object in a desert hangar. It fundamentally reorients humanity's place in the cosmic story. Its mere existence would be the definitive answer to the ancient question, are we alone? But in a form more profound than we ever imagined. It would mean we are not just not alone, but that we are newcomers, perhaps even primitive apprentices, in a universe teeming with older, wiser, and vastly more capable intelligences. The isolation we have felt while staring at the stars would be replaced with a humbling, and perhaps daunting, sense of cosmic community. We would have to confront the reality that we are not the pinnacle of creation, but participants in a much larger, older drama. The technological revolution promised by such a craft is staggering to contemplate. At its core, the alleged propulsion system represents mastery over gravity, the most pervasive yet weakest of the fundamental forces. Harnessing gravity for propulsion and energy would dwarf every technological leap since the invention of the wheel. It would render fossil fuels, nuclear fission, and even most renewable energy concepts obsolete overnight. Imagine cities powered by compact gravity reactors, vehicles that move silently without touching the ground, and the complete elimination of the environmental costs of transportation and energy production. The sport model wouldn't just be a new aircraft. It would be the key to a post-scarcity civilization, if its principles could be understood and democratized. This mastery unlocks the solar system and beyond. Space travel, currently a brutal, expensive, and dangerous endeavor constrained by rocket equations and life support limitations, would transform into something elegant and accessible. With gravity control, the concept of launch disappears. A craft simply decides to go. The tyranny of distance, the light-speed barrier approached through space-time manipulation, becomes a navigable challenge. The Moon, Mars, and the moons of Jupiter become suburbs, not untouchable frontiers. The galaxy, in time, becomes our neighborhood. The sport model, as a template, suggests that interstellar travel is not a fantasy, but an engineering problem that has already been solved by someone, somewhere. Yet, there is a sobering counterpoint. we might not be ready for such a revelation. Our global society is fractured by conflict, inequality, and short-term thinking. The power contained in the sport model's technology is unimaginable. In the wrong hands, gravity manipulation could be a weapon of catastrophic, tectonic-scale destruction. The mere possession of such technology could trigger global arms races of unprecedented danger. The societal and political structures required to manage this knowledge ethically, to ensure it benefits all humanity and does not become the ultimate tool of control, do not currently exist. We would need to evolve rapidly in wisdom and unity. This points to the deeper transformation required. Accepting the sport model as real would force a philosophical and spiritual reckoning. Our history, our religions, our understanding of physics and biology would all need to be re-examined in this new light. It would demand a new story for humanity, one that incorporates our place among the stars. The challenge would be as much about integrating this new cosmic identity into our collective psyche as it would be about reverse engineering the hardware. The journey would be inward as much as outward. The story of the sport model, therefore, transcends engineering and enters the realm of human potential. It's not just about one mysterious craft hidden in the Nevada desert. It's about the future it implies, a future of boundless possibility paired with immense responsibility, a future where humanity must grow up very quickly to meet the cosmos that may have already come knocking at our door. The passage of time has not closed the book on Area 51 or the sport model. It has simply equipped a new generation of truth seekers with more sophisticated tools. Modern investigative efforts blend old-fashioned persistence with digital-age technology. The Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, remains a critical, if frustrating, instrument. Researchers and journalists file meticulous requests for documents related to historical programs, base operations, and specific personnel. The results are often heavily redacted or met with claims of exemption for national security, but occasional gems slip through, like the 2013 CIA acknowledgement, proving that patient, legal pressure can sometimes pry a sliver of light from the vault. Independent researchers and citizen journalists form the backbone of this ongoing inquiry. Operating outside traditional media and academic institutions, they scour declassified archives, cross-reference old employee directories, and analyze satellite imagery with a fervor that rivals any intelligence agency. Online communities dissect every new piece of information, from a strange geological formation near Papoose Lake spotted on Google Earth to a passing mention of exotic materials in an old defense contractor report. This decentralized, crowdsourced investigation creates a resilient network of scrutiny, where one person might hit a dead end, another finds a new angle. Technology itself has become the greatest ally. High-resolution commercial satellite imagery allows anyone to monitor the physical changes at Groom Lake, new construction, runway activity, vehicle movements, in near real time. While the deepest secrets remain indoors, the patterns of life at the base are more visible than ever. Advanced software can analyze old photographs and videos for authenticity, and social media enables the rapid sharing and vetting of information across global networks. The mystery is no longer confined to the desert. It lives on servers and in forums, constantly being re-examined. The role of the dedicated, independent researcher is more crucial than ever. These individuals often spend years, even decades, building relationships with sources, filing FOIAs, and connecting disparate dots. They operate without the constraints of corporate media or government affiliation, driven purely by a need to understand. Figures like the late Norio Hayakawa, who documented the base for years, or researchers deep in the archives of the Nevada test site, provide the continuity that turns a news cycle story into a historical investigation. They are the keepers of the long memory. This relentless search matters because it represents the public's right to question power and seek understanding. It is an exercise in democratic accountability, applied to the most shadowy corners of the state. The search for truth about Area 51 is not just about UFOs. It is a test case for transparency in an age of profound secrecy. It asks, what can a society know about the projects conducted in its name, with its resources, that could alter its very destiny? The persistence of the inquiry sends a message that some mysteries are too important to be abandoned to official silence. The investigation into what happened, and what may still be happening, in that remote desert valley never truly stopped. It evolved, adapted, and found new energy with each technological leap and each courageous whistleblower. And with every new tool, from sharper satellite eyes to AI-assisted data analysis, comes a renewed sense of hope that the next clue, the next document, the next revelation might be the one that finally brings the full picture into focus. The story of Area 51 and the sport model has long since escaped the confines of classified briefings and desert watch posts to become a permanent fixture in our global culture. Its influence is woven into the fabric of our entertainment, our art, and our collective imagination. Hollywood has been one of its most prolific amplifiers. Films like Independence Day, 1996, which depicted a massive alien spacecraft hovering directly over the base, and Paul, 2011, a comedy about an alien escaping from it, cemented Area 51's image as the ground zero for extraterrestrial secrets. It serves as the ultimate shortcut in storytelling. A single location name evokes instant recognition of conspiracy, advanced technology, and cosmic mystery. The aesthetic of the sport model itself, as described by Lazar, the seamless, disc-shaped hull, the lack of visible propulsion, has deeply influenced science fiction design. Before 1989, alien craft in movies were often bug-eyed saucers or organic-looking monsters. The sport model narrative introduced the idea of a sleek, minimalist, and technologically sublime vehicle, an object that looked both ancient and futuristic. This design sensibility, emphasizing smooth curves, unified surfaces, and a sense of silent power, can be seen in everything from the ships in contact to the visual language of countless video games and TV shows, shaping how we visualize sophisticated non-human technology. Television played a monumental role in mainstreaming the mystery. The X-Files, which premiered in 1993, didn't just feature Area 51. It built an entire mythology around government cover-ups, black oil, and syndicates hiding alien truth. While fictional, it trained a generation to think in terms of hidden documents, mysterious informants, and the phrase "the truth is out there." The show validated the emotional and intellectual pursuit of hidden knowledge, making the search for answers about UFOs and secret bases feel like a heroic, if paranoid, endeavor. It created a cultural template that millions adopted. This cultural seepage fostered the growth of a dedicated community. UFO conventions, once small gatherings of enthusiasts, grew into major events connecting people from all walks of life. These conventions became places where the Lazar testimony was dissected, where alleged whistleblowers could speak, and where a sense of shared purpose was forged. The community provided social validation for an interest that was often mocked in the mainstream, creating a space where asking big questions was not only allowed but encouraged. It turned passive curiosity into active participation. The legend also spawned an entire tourist industry in the Nevada desert. The tiny town of Rachel, Nevada, embraced its role as the UFO capital of the world. The Little Alien Motel and Restaurant became a pilgrimage site, its walls covered in memorabilia and signed photos from researchers and TV crews. The Extraterrestrial Highway, State Route 375, was officially designated in 1996, its signs featuring little green aliens. Tourists flocked to take pictures, attend alien-themed festivals, and gaze toward the distant mountains that hide the base. The mystery became an economic engine and a shared destination for the curious. Ultimately, the story achieved something rare. It entered our collective consciousness as a modern myth. It functions not unlike ancient legends of hidden cities or magical artifacts, but updated for a technological age. It speaks to deep human themes: the desire to know what is hidden, the fear of powerful authorities, the hope for cosmic connection, and the awe of technology beyond understanding. Whether one views it as fact or fable, it has changed how we frame the possible. It has provided a specific, tangible anchor for our speculation about government secrecy and alien life. Real or not, the persistent tale of a secret craft called the Sport Model, hidden in a desert mountain, has fundamentally altered how we imagine humanity's relationship with the unknown, proving that a powerful story can shape culture as profoundly as any confirmed truth. Perhaps one of the most beautiful and enduring legacies of mysteries like the Sport Model is their ability to act as a gravitational lens, bending the trajectory of human curiosity toward new and daring horizons. While mainstream science rightly demands evidence, the fringe claims of UFO encounters have, historically, served as provocative thought experiments, posing questions so profound they inspire legitimate researchers to explore the boundaries of the possible. A handful of scientists, often working outside institutional constraints, have taken aspects of these claims seriously enough to ask, if this were true, what physics would make it possible? This question, born of mystery, has fertilized fields of legitimate theoretical inquiry. The most direct inspiration lies in the pursuit of gravity manipulation. The core claim of the Sport Model, that it generates and controls gravitational fields for propulsion, strikes at the heart of one of physics' greatest challenges: the unification of gravity with quantum mechanics. While no mainstream lab claims to have a gravity generator, the theoretical work is vibrant. Concepts like gravito-electromagnetism, GM, which treats certain aspects of gravity in a framework analogous to electromagnetism, suggest that if you could create a sufficiently powerful gravitomagnetic field, you might influence inertia or produce thrust. This is not proof of UFOs, but it is proof that the concept described by witnesses is a subject of serious, if speculative, physics. This line of thinking leads directly to one of the most famous theoretical constructs inspired by the desire for warp drive travel, the Alcubierre metric. Proposed by physicist Miguel Alcubierre in 1994, it is a valid solution to Einstein's field equations of general relativity. It describes a method of stretching spacetime behind a spacecraft and compressing it in front, creating a warp bubble that allows the craft to effectively move faster than light within the bubble while never locally exceeding light speed. The energy requirements are currently prohibitive, often cited as needing the mass energy of Jupiter, but the mathematics are sound. The Alcubierre drive is a direct descendant of the question posed by UFO reports. How could something move like that? It translates witness testimony into tensor calculus. Beyond specific theories, the UFO phenomenon has inspired broader research into advanced propulsion concepts. Organizations like NASA's now-defunct Breakthrough Propulsion Physics Project and ongoing work by groups like the Applied Physics Laboratory have studied concepts such as quantum vacuum thrusters, inertial mass reduction, and microwave propulsion. While none claim an extraterrestrial origin, the driving motivation is to achieve the kind of performance, high efficiency, no obvious propellant, potentially revolutionary thrust that UFO reports describe. The mystery sets a target, and science begins the long process of figuring out how to hit it. The relationship between science fiction and science fact is a virtuous cycle here. Stories of alien craft like the Sport Model are a form of cultural science fiction. They imagine a finished technology. Theoretical physicists then work backward from that imagined endpoint, asking what principles would underpin it. This process has happened repeatedly in history. The communicators in Star Trek inspired the flip phone, and the tablet computers in 2001. A space odyssey preceded the iPad by decades. Imagining the artifact inspires the search for the underlying science. Most importantly, these mysteries have served as a powerful recruitment tool for science itself. Countless engineers, physicists, and aerospace professionals have cited early fascinations with UFOs and the possibility of extraterrestrial technology as the spark that ignited their careers. The question, how would that work, is a gateway drug to a life in STEM. For a young mind, a story about a silent, gravity-defying disk is more compelling than a textbook problem about inclined planes. It represents the ultimate puzzle, inviting them into the worlds of materials science, quantum physics, and cosmology to look for the pieces. This underscores the intrinsic value of asking what if, even in the absence of proof. The what if question is the engine of hypothesis, the first step of the scientific method. The UFO mystery, for all its noise and controversy, keeps a specific, thrilling what if alive in the public and scientific mind. What if travel between the stars is not only possible, but is being accomplished through a physics we are just beginning to glimpse? This question, however it is raised, provokes thought, challenges dogma, and pushes the envelope of theoretical exploration. It reminds us that science is not just a collection of settled facts, but a dynamic process of inquiry driven by curiosity about the unknown. Sometimes, the most impossible-seeming questions, the ones born from whispered stories in the desert, can lead not to dead ends, but to new frontiers of real understanding, proving that imagination is not the enemy of science, but its essential guiding partner. Today, decades after the storm he ignited, Bob Lazar lives a life that balances the extraordinary notoriety of his past with a carefully constructed, quiet present. He has largely retreated from the relentless glare of the media spotlight, choosing to focus on the tangible, scientific work that has always been his passion. He is the owner and operator of United Nuclear, a company based in Michigan that supplies scientific equipment, chemicals, and rare materials to researchers, hobbyists, and educators. This venture allows him to apply his physics and engineering knowledge in a practical, public-facing way, far removed from the shadowy world of classified projects. It is a legitimate, successful business, yet skeptics often cynically frame it as profiting from his fame, while supporters see it as the natural outlet for a brilliant mind that was never about seeking attention. His private life is guarded. He is married and values the sanctuary of his home and family. The stability they provide a stark contrast to the chaos of the late 80s and 90s. He grants interviews only sparingly, typically to trusted figures like George Knapp, or for documentary projects he feels are serious and respectful. In these rare appearances, his demeanor remains remarkably consistent with those early, shadowy broadcasts, calm, soft-spoken, slightly weary, and technically precise. He exhibits no sign of a showman. If anything, he conveys a sense of someone who has answered the same questions 1,000 times and would rather be in his lab, but who feels a lingering duty to the story he set loose upon the world. His testimony, the core of it all, remains unchanged. He does not embellish with new, sensational details to stay relevant. He repeats the same descriptions of S4, the sport model's interior, the reactor, and the test flights with a fatigued consistency. When asked if he would do it all again, his reflections are complex. He has acknowledged the immense personal cost, the loss of privacy, the character assassination, the fear, the strain on relationships. Yet, in quieter moments, he has suggested that given the potential of the technology he witnessed, a power source that could free humanity from energy want and open the stars, he felt he had no moral choice but to speak. The burden of that secret, he implies, was heavier than the burden of the backlash. What he hopes people understand, he has said, is not that they must believe him, but that they should look at the information itself. He has consistently pointed away from his person and toward the details, the physics of the craft, the specificity of element 115, the logic of the location. He seems less concerned with being vindicated as an individual and more with the idea that the concept he introduced of a reverse engineering program on non-human technology receives serious consideration. After everything, the ridicule, the investigations, the death threats, the decades of debate, he remains, in essence, unchanged, a man who says he saw something impossible, who told someone about it, and who has spent the rest of his life living with the consequences, preferring the quiet company of science to the noisy arena of belief. After everything, he remains consistent in his story and his character, and has chosen a life of relative, hard-won quiet. For a story as extraordinary as the sport model and its alleged home at S4, the standard for definitive proof is, rightly, exceptionally high. What would constitute such proof? It would require something undeniable and examinable by the global scientific community, a physical artifact from a craft, such as a material sample with isotopic ratios not found in nature or exhibiting properties that defy known physics. It would require unambiguous documentation, fully unredacted contracts, blueprints, or photographs with verifiable provenance directly linking to the program. Or it would require the official, on-the-record testimony of multiple high-ranking officials with first-hand knowledge, backed by a trove of declassified data, admitting to the program's existence and scope. We have fragments that hint, but we have none of these conclusive pieces. The scarcity of such physical evidence is the central challenge, and it is by design. If such a program exists within the classified world, its security protocols would be its highest priority. Materials would be tracked at the molecular level. Documents would exist only in secure facilities, never digitized on vulnerable networks. The very nature of a successful secret is that it leaves no trail for outsiders to follow. The catch-22 of classified evidence is profound. The most convincing evidence is, by definition, locked behind the very classification walls that the whistleblower is accusing the government of using to hide the truth. To provide the evidence is to reveal the classified sources and methods, which is illegal and would immediately discredit the provider as a traitor in the eyes of the system. Whistleblowers like Lazar, or more recently David Grush, thus operate in this impossible space. They can describe what they saw or what they were told, but they cannot legally walk out with a piece of the sport model's hull or a stack of internal memos. Their credibility becomes the proxy for the evidence, which is why attacks on their character and background are such an effective counter-strategy. They risk everything: their careers, their freedom, their personal safety, not to deliver a smoking gun, but to point toward the room where they believe it's locked away, hoping others will find the key. Investigating these claims is further hampered by the sites themselves. Groom Lake and its suspected annexes are among the most physically secure locations on Earth. They are protected by vast exclusion zones, sensors, armed patrols, and legal statutes that treat trespass as a federal offense. Satellite imagery shows buildings, but not what's inside them. The secrets are protected by both policy and geography, making independent verification through direct observation a practical impossibility. The truth is buried not just in paperwork, but in a remote, guarded desert. This leads to the important philosophical distinction: the absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. It is a statement of our current position, not a final verdict. We lack evidence because the subject is, by its alleged nature, designed to be evidence-free in the public domain. The lack of a leaked photo or a material sample does not prove the sport model doesn't exist. It only proves that if it does, the system built to conceal it has, so far, functioned as intended. Our inability to access the evidence is precisely what the story predicts. So, we find ourselves at an investigative impasse, but not an intellectual dead end. The persistent questions, the puzzling details like Element 115, the recent high-level whistleblowers, and the government's own shifting stance on UAPs suggest that the mystery has merit, even if the proof remains elusive. The task, then, is not to abandon the questions, but to refine them, to support ethical investigations, and to maintain a healthy, open-minded skepticism that demands proof but does not dismiss intriguing anomalies out of hand. We are still missing the most crucial pieces of this puzzle, the tangible, verifiable artifacts that would settle the debate once and for all. But in the search for truth, the act of asking the question, of pointing toward the locked door and wondering what's behind it, is itself a vital and enduring human endeavor. Should we ever stop asking simply because the answers are so well hidden? We are living in what can only be described as a UFO, or more accurately, a UAP renaissance. The period since 2017 has witnessed a transformation in how the subject is treated by media, government, and even the scientific community. This is no longer the domain of late-night radio and niche conventions. It is a topic of congressional hearings, Pentagon briefings, and front-page news. This modern disclosure movement is characterized not by a single dramatic announcement, but by a sustained, incremental, and official unraveling of decades of policy that treated the subject as taboo. The government's stance has undergone a radical, if cautious, shift. From decades of blanket denial and ridicule, we have moved to the establishment of official investigative offices, first the UAP Task Force, and now the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, ARO, within the Pentagon, tasked with coordinating efforts across the military and intelligence community. This institutionalization signals that the phenomenon is a persistent, data-rich issue of operational and national security concern. Officials now openly state that UAPs are real, pose potential safety risks to aviation, and may indicate technological surprises from strategic competitors or something entirely unknown. The conversation has moved from if to what and how. Fueling this shift are new whistleblowers, but of a different caliber than in the past. Figures like David Grush bring impeccable credentials from within the intelligence community itself. Their allegations are not of personal sightings, but of institutional secrets, illegally concealed programs, misappropriated funds, and recovered non-human materials. They are providing testimony to inspectors general and under oath to Congress, triggering formal investigations. This represents a seismic change. The challenge is now coming from within the classified world's own ranks, using its own oversight mechanisms. Public opinion has evolved in tandem. Polls consistently show that a majority of Americans now believe the government is hiding information about UFOs, and that UAPs are likely real. The stigma, while still present, has significantly diminished. Discussing the topic no longer automatically relegates one to the fringe. It can be a subject of serious debate among friends, on mainstream podcasts, and in op-eds. This cultural thaw is both a cause and effect of the official changes. As the government takes it seriously, so does the public, and vice versa. Perhaps most surprisingly, the scientific community is showing tentative signs of increased openness. While the demand for rigorous evidence remains paramount, there is a growing acknowledgement that the empirical data gathered by military sensors, the radar returns, infrared signatures, and visual confirmations by trained observers, constitutes a legitimate anomaly worthy of study. Prestigious institutions like Harvard's Galileo Project, led by astronomer Avi Loeb, are now dedicating resources to the systematic scientific study of UAPs, seeking to collect new, high-quality data free from government classification. This represents a critical bridge between the world of national security and the world of open academic inquiry. The next decade promises to be pivotal. We can expect more congressional hearings, more declassified reports, however sanitized, and potentially more whistleblowers emboldened by new protections. The key questions will be whether the legislative pressure can overcome the bureaucratic inertia of secrecy, and whether any physical evidence can be brought into the light of peer-reviewed science. The goalposts for disclosure are also shifting. It may not be a president announcing aliens on the White House lawn, but a gradual, official confirmation of a non-human intelligence through validated material analysis or a conclusive ruling out of all terrestrial origins for the most advanced objects. In this new era, the story of Bob Lazar and the sport model assumes a new role. It is no longer just an isolated, disputed tale. It appears as a precursor, a template. Lazar's 1989 narrative, a reverse engineering program on non-human craft at a secret base, hidden from Congress, is the very blueprint of the allegations now being made under oath by intelligence officials in 2023. He spoke of element 115 years before its synthesis. He described gravity propulsion before the Alcubierre drive entered popular science. His story, whether viewed as prophetic or prescient, effectively paved the conceptual way, preparing the public imagination and providing a specific framework that later whistleblowers' claims would eerily mirror. We are living in a new and unprecedented era of official attention and potential disclosure, where the whispers from the desert are being echoed in the halls of power. The enduring question is no longer if something is being hidden, but how deep the truth goes, and where this gathering momentum will ultimately lead our understanding of our world and our place in the cosmos. Our journey has taken us from the silent, starlit expanse of the Nevada desert to the inner sanctums of imagined hangars, from the spark of one man's testimony to the burgeoning, global conversation of today. We've traced the contours of a secret that is not just about technology, but about us, our curiosity, our fears, our institutions, and our place in a vast and mysterious universe. The story of the sport model and Area 51 is, in the end, a mirror. It reflects our deep-seated need to question, to explore, and to seek truths that lie just beyond the edge of the known. We have seen the immense power of curiosity. It is the engine that has driven researchers to scour archives, filmmakers to point their lenses at the desert, and citizens to file countless requests for transparency. This innate human drive has kept the ember of this mystery glowing for generations, refusing to let it be extinguished by official silence or public ridicule. It is a testament to the idea that some questions are so compelling, their potential answers so profound, that they simply will not be dismissed. Why do some mysteries persist with such tenacity? They endure because they live in the fertile gap between what is proven and what is felt, between data and wonder. They speak to possibilities that are grand enough to inspire, but elusive enough to avoid being pinned down and dissected. The sport model legend persists not solely because of evidence, but because of what it represents, the tantalizing possibility that a different, more wondrous reality exists parallel to our own, hidden in plain sight. It is a story that nourishes our sense of awe. This speaks to a fundamental human need, to explore the unknown, whether that unknown is a physical frontier like space or a conceptual one like the nature of consciousness. The UFO mystery, at its best, channels that exploratory instinct. It encourages us to look up at the night sky not with passive acceptance, but with active wonder, to consider that the cosmos might be more interactive, more surprising, and more populated than we have dared to believe. Our exploration has also revealed much about the dynamics of secrecy and truth. We have seen how truth, in the world of national security, can become a commodity to be controlled, weighed against risks of panic, vulnerability, and geopolitical instability. We have learned that the absence of an answer can be as telling as its presence, and that the effort to suppress a story can sometimes be the very thing that ensures its longevity. The dance between concealment and revelation is a powerful, age-old drama in which we are all participants, whether as seekers, skeptics, or simply observers. There is a profound beauty in not knowing everything. Certainty can be comforting, but mystery is inspiring. It leaves room for imagination, for speculation, for the gentle thrill of the what if. The unresolved nature of the sport model story is not a failure of our inquiry, but a feature of its subject. It invites us to remain open, to hold multiple possibilities in our minds at once, and to find peace in the ongoing search rather than demanding a final, simplistic conclusion. So, as we gently draw this exploration to a close, let this be an encouragement to carry that sense of wonder with you. Let the mystery of the desert, the craft, and the stars remind you that the universe is a place of infinite possibility. It is okay to question. It is okay to look at the official story and softly wonder, but what if there's more? This curiosity is not a flaw, but a gift, the very impulse that has led humanity to every discovery we have ever made. Now, as you prepare to rest, let your mind drift to that peaceful desert landscape under a canopy of stars. Imagine the cool, quiet air, the distant silhouette of mountains, and the profound silence that holds its secrets close. Whether the sport model rests in a hidden hangar or only in the realm of compelling myth, its story has expanded our imagination. It has asked us to consider that we are part of something astonishingly larger. Carry that feeling of expansive possibility with you, not as a worry, but as a comforting, awe-inspiring thought. Thank you for joining this journey of curiosity. Wherever the truth ultimately lies, the act of wondering, of looking up and asking questions, connects us to the very best of what it means to be human. So, as you relax into sleep, let your thoughts be calm, your mind open, and your sense of wonder gently alive, under the same endless, mysterious sky that has inspired dreamers and seekers since the beginning of time.